Chapter 132. Fan Xian didn't have time to explain. He smiled and ordered, "I'll talk, you remember." He didn't have time to grind the ink. He picked up a quill, dipped it in some of the ink left in the inkstone, and gave it to his sister. He then closed his eyes and began to recall the complicated layout of the palace courtyards and paths. The more Fan Ruo wrote, the paler her face became. Because Fan Xian was trying to memorize, his face also became paler. The two of them looked like two white faces. With great difficulty, Fan Ruo drew most of the paths in the palace. Finally, Fan Ruo couldn't help but cry out in a low voice, "Brother, don't you know that this is a great crime?" Fan Xian relaxed and sat down in a chair. He didn't speak for a long time. Today, he had spent half a day in the palace. He had to chat with the nobles and remember the complicated roads. In the end, he had to have a mental battle with the eldest princess for a long time. It was too exhausting, and he couldn't recover for a while. He was familiar with the laws of the Qing kingdom, and he knew that the palace buildings were not allowed to be drawn. This was to prevent people from sneaking into the palace to do treasonous things. Fan Xian needed this map because he had already made a plan. In this plan, he would sneak into the palace that night to find the key. He could ask Lin Wan about the paths in the palace, but that was too risky. Furthermore, the paths taken by the masters of the palace were completely different from the paths Fan Xian had carefully planned. Even if Wu Zhu told him, it wouldn't work, like the hiding places behind the fake mountains or the blind spots in the bushes of flowers. If he hadn't walked them himself, he wouldn't have been able to draw a map that satisfied him. Fan Xian stood up and walked to the table to pick up his sister's drawing. Although it was done in a hurry, his sister's brushwork was still meticulous. He couldn't help but happily pat her on the head. "It's done. I'll invite you to Yishur Tavern for some seafood." Fan Ruo was angry. She snatched the map back. "It's done? What's done? Do you know how big of a deal this is?" "No, I'm going to tell father." Fan Xian smiled bitterly. He thought to himself that the concept of the inviolability of the emperor's power was indeed deeply ingrained in people's hearts. Of course, he also understood that his sister was mainly worried about his safety and the children of the manor. If others knew that he had secretly drawn a map of the royal palace, given the relationship between the Fan Manor and the royal family, it would probably be very tragic. "Don't worry, I'll rest in a bit. I'll immediately memorize this map and then burn it. No one will know." Fan Xian smiled and comforted his sister. Tears welled up in Fan Ruo's eyes. "Brother, why did you draw this picture?" Fan Xian sighed and lowered his head to look into his sister's eyes. Enunciating each word, he said, "Because there is something I want in the royal palace." "You want to go to the palace to steal?" Fan Ruo was so surprised that she wanted to scream, but she quickly covered her mouth. Fan Xian said seriously, "Correct, but I didn't steal it. That thing was mine to begin with." Fan Ruo shook off her shock and immediately recovered her usual calm and intelligence. She deduced the truth of the matter and lowered her trembling voice. "Does it have something to do with Aunt Yi?" Fan Xian smiled. "I can't hide this from you." It was a few simple words, but they were filled with the trust between brother and sister. He continued to smile. "It doesn't matter. What kind of person is your brother?" He punched a 7-year-old child and kicked an old man in his 70s. He stood on an unmarked grave and roared, "If you don't believe me, come out." But no one dared to make a sound. "Ha ha!" Ruo laughed with some difficulty. She didn't think her brother's joke was funny, but she was still worried. She knew that Fan Xian looked beautiful and gentle, but in reality, his heart was exceptionally hard and cold. She couldn't persuade him, so she could only let him be and pray at home every day. "Actually, I'm very selfish." Fan Xian looked at the worry on her brow and suddenly calmed himself. "Every time there's something I can't bear alone, I'm willing to tell you. It looks like I trust you, but in reality, I just want to find someone to share the pressure with. But I never thought that this kind of pressure is actually a greater pain for you. At least I still have you to talk to." "Who can you talk to?" "For example, my mother is the mistress of the Yi family, or I'm about to go to the palace to steal something." Ruo looked at him with a trace of worry. "Trust and pressure cancel each other out. I still like that you don't hide things from me." The negotiations were still going on. The work of redrawing the border was very difficult. Originally, with the support of Fan Xian's analysis of the case, the official in charge of the Chamberlain of Honlu Temple of Qing was unusually tough. Several times, he almost forced the Northern Qi envoys to sign their names on the documents. But for some reason, perhaps because something had happened in Northern Qi, the Northern Qi envoys shamelessly and even hysterically dragged on, as if they were waiting for something. This smell of conspiracy was immediately picked up by the experienced Vice Minister of the Chamberlain of Honlu Temple, Xian Chiwu. That afternoon, after a fruitless negotiation, he held a small teapot and looked at Fan Xian, indicating for him to follow him out. Along the way, there were officials who paid their respects to the two envoys. With great difficulty, they found a quiet place. Xian Chiwu sighed tiredly. "Master Fan, do you feel that something is amiss?" Regarding this negotiation, although Fan Xian had the correct attitude of observing and learning, he had participated from start to finish, and so he felt that the change in attitude of the Northern Qi envoys was a little strange. But if they had recently obtained a bargaining chip to rely on, it should have been laid out by now. There was no way they were still dragging on the negotiation table like a scoundrel. He thought for a moment and suddenly frowned. "I'm afraid that Northern Qi is now thinking of a way to obtain a bargaining chip to use on the negotiation table." Xian Chiwu looked at him and nodded. "I think so too. So tonight, I will enter the palace to see His Majesty and ask His Majesty to issue an edict ordering the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council to assist the Chamberlain of Honlu Temple. If I don't find out what Northern Qi is thinking, I won't be able to rest easy." Fan Xian leaned against the railing and narrowed his eyes in thought. What did Northern Qi want? Unreasonably, he thought of the Overwatch Council's spy network in Northern Qi and of Yin Bingyun, who had been hiding in Northern Qi for 4 years. Xian Chiwu didn't know what Fan Xian was thinking, but he said calmly, "I will enter the palace tonight, but I won't be able to obtain much on the surface. Deputy Fan, you can no longer hide your abilities." Fan Xian smiled bitterly. Xian Chiwu must have thought that his father had secretly helped him obtain the dossier. But the heavens knew that his father had secretly helped the emperor manage a power that even he had never come into contact with. But after thinking about it, he felt that he really needed to ask. At the very least, he needed to ensure Yin Bingyun's safety in Northern Qi. That night, in the hidden courtyard, Fan Xian summoned Wang Qinian and told him about his and Xian Chiwu's concerns. Wang Qinian's reaction gave Fan Xian an ominous feeling. "The council hasn't received a greeting from the crows for 8 days." Wang Qinian's brows were tightly furrowed. "This kind of information shouldn't be available to someone of your level." Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. "But I'm not going to ask you how you know. I just want you to remind the council to be careful in Northern Qi." Wang Qinian shook his head. "It's all one-way communication. If it's broken, it'll be hard to get it back. Besides, Yin Bingyun is the head spy of Northern Qi. If something happens to him, there'll be no point in contacting him again. No matter what, we have to remind him to be careful." A cold light flashed in Fan Xian's eyes. He didn't like giving up on anyone for the sake of the country, especially Yin Bingyun. As the son of a high-ranking official, he had been undercover for 4 years and had sacrificed much. Fan Xian now saw himself as a part of the kingdom of Qing and the Overwatch Council. Naturally, he felt a kind of admiration for Yin Bingyun, whom he had never met. Fan Xian was thinking of something else. He looked at Wang Qinian calmly. "I have a mission, but I can't go through the council. I hope I can ask for your help." Wang Qinian looked at Fan Xian, confused. "You can't tell Director Chun." Fan Xian's tone was calm, but Wang Qinian could hear the coldness in it. "Yes." As soon as he said this, Wang Qinian knew that he had bet his life on this seemingly gentle, but actually ruthless, young man. As for the council, Director Chun had only told him to listen to Fan Xian and nothing else. That night, the unfortunate news was finally confirmed. The spy network of the 4th Bureau of the Qing Kingdom's Overwatch Council in Northern Qi had fortunately been largely preserved. But to everyone's surprise, as the head of the spy network, Yin Bingyun had been captured alive by Northern Qi's internal experts in a silk shop in Shanjing. For such an incident, it was usually broken through from the lower levels and then traced back to the top. It was rare for someone at the top of the spy network to be captured in one fell swoop. For such a situation to occur, there was only one possibility. Someone in the upper levels of the kingdom of Qing had colluded with a foreign country. Of course, the news of Yan Bingyun's capture could not be spread. Although that would be a blow to the kingdom of Qing's reputation, it would be even more detrimental to Northern Qi's interests. Northern Qi needed such a leader in exchange for corresponding benefits, not just to strike at the enemy's morale. As for the Qing bureaucracy, the eldest son of Yan Ruohai, the head of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, had died 4 years ago. No one knew that he had been sent to Northern Qi by the royal court. In the past few days, no one who knew about this had been able to sleep well. In a most secret room of the Chamberlain of Dependencies, Vice Minister Xian closed his eyes and handed a piece of paper to Fan Xian. Fan Xian took it and looked at it. It was a painting of a thin cloud flying high above the icy plains. During the negotiations that day, an unremarkable figure in the Northern Qi diplomatic mission had secretly handed it to Vice Minister Xian. At the time, the expression on that person's face had almost provoked Vice Minister Xian to draw his guard's sword and strike him. The two words Bingyun were hidden in the painting. It seemed that the Northern Qi diplomatic mission had received the news and were preparing to make an offer. Chapter 133. There really is a traitor. Fan Xian and Xian both opened their mouths at the same time, and then shut their mouths at the same time. Both of them believed that the head spy of Northern Qi was not a weakling who would speak under torture. Since he could so easily capture Yan Bingyun and learn his real name, it was clear that someone hidden in the Qing court had some sort of agreement with Northern Qi. Xian shook his head. Before this, even the Crown Prince and I did not know that Yan Bingyun had gone to Northern Qi. I think that there are no more than 5 people in the court who have the right to know about this. Even a fool would not believe that they had betrayed the country. There are always benefits to betraying the country, and in reality, the entire Qing kingdom is run by His Majesty. What benefits could there be from betraying the country? Fan Xian and Xian looked at each other and saw the worry in each other's eyes. Both of them thought of a frightening possibility. What if it wasn't a traitor? What if it was a ploy by some official to attack the Overwatch Council? Fan Xian thought back to when Wang Qinian had told him about Yan Bingyun, and he had felt it was strange. How'd he know? Was the Overwatch Council so confident in their own internal control? Only later did he realize that Chen Pingping had told him through Wang Qinian. But he still felt some lingering fear. If the news had leaked from his side, he would not be able to escape death. Could there be such a crazy person? For the sake of a power struggle in the court, they would trample on the interests of the entire Qing kingdom. Xian shook his head with a bitter smile. Fan Xian shook his head as well. Thinking of his trip to the palace, he knew that there were many such madmen in the kingdom of Qing. He composed himself and asked, assuming that Yan Bingyun has been captured, what will His Majesty do? Northern Qi underestimated His Majesty's determination. When Vice Minister Xian thought of the lofty Son of Heaven, he immediately felt emboldened and said, I will not yield even an inch of the territory that I have occupied. Fan Xian was surprised. What about Yan Bingyun? Exchange. Xian's expression was sinister. Exchange prisoners. His Majesty has made up his mind. The previous prisoner exchange agreement will be canceled and a new one will be drafted. All we need to do is wait for Northern Qi to send Yan Bingyun's token for confirmation. After that, a new round of prisoner exchange negotiations will begin. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, Northern Qi thinks they're holding a big fish, so they probably won't agree. This time, we will send 2 more people back to Northern Qi, Vice-Chancellor Xian said coldly. If Northern Qi is still unwilling, in 3 months in the early winter, the Emperor will behead Northern Qi, capture the heads of 1,000 people, send them back to Northern Qi, and the army will rise again. Using power to suppress others can be considered a helpless move. I'm just afraid that Northern Qi will also fight to the death. There are 3,000 captives on both sides. No matter how much they kill, it will be useless. Fan Xian's hand lightly slapped the desk, and a strange thought suddenly welled up in his mind. Who are the two people preparing to join in the exchange of prisoners? Can Northern Qi agree? One is Xiao En, who's been locked up for 20 years. Xin Shaoqing looked at him warmly, knowing that this young man did not know Xiaoen's name. This man was the head spy of Northern Wei. Before the second Northern Expedition, Director Chun of the Overwatch Council and Master Fei personally led the Black Knights and captured Xiao En alive on the day of his son's wedding. After he was captured, the Northern Wei spy network was like a group of dragons without a leader and became a pile of loose sand. When the Emperor personally led the expedition, he was able to break through like a hot knife through butter and beat a huge empire into its current weak state. Later, when a merit was discussed, the Overwatch Council was awarded the highest merit. At the time, we young scholars all believed that if Xiao En had not been so bold as to leave Shangjing of Northern Qi to attend his son's wedding, the imperial court would not have been able to capture him, and the subsequent battles would not have gone so smoothly. Hearing this story from decades ago, Fan Xian sighed and was speechless. He listened to Xin Shaoqing's last words. Of course, Xiaoen was bold enough to leave Shangjing. Director Chun was even bolder, daring to enter 800 li into enemy territory. Although he paid the price of a pair of legs, he still managed to capture Xiao En. Before that, Xiaoen of Northern Wei and Chun Pingping of Southern Qing were known to the world as the most fearsome dark ministers. After Xiao En was captured alive by Director Chun, naturally no one dared to compare him to him. Fan Xian listened with yearning. So that was how the old cripple's legs were broken. He had never imagined that Chun Pingping had such a heroic side to him. Exchanging Xiao En for Yan Bingyan, he thought for a moment, then judged purely from reason. It seems we are at a disadvantage. Last night, several ministers thought so too. Xin Shaoqing looked at him with a smile. But the Emperor and Director Chun did not think so. After all, Xiaoen is already 70 years old, and once he was defeated by Director Chun, he naturally could not regain his former glory. Master Yin endured humiliation and hid in enemy territory for 4 years, and his contributions were self-evident. Exchanging an old man for the future of the kingdom of Qing, what is wrong with that? Fan Xian nodded and asked curiously, "Were you afraid that Northern Qi would not agree?" Who else did they add? That woman was a request of Northern Qi in the past, so His Majesty simply agreed. Chapter 134. 3 days later, ceremonial music was played. Red lanterns were hung high, and an endless stream of guests came and went. It was a splendid scene of prosperity. The Northern Qi diplomatic mission and the Dongi guests were welcomed by the kingdom of Qing. Their faces were full of smiles as they walked along the long passageway into the most solemn palace of the kingdom of Qing. Looking at the expressions of the three parties, it seemed that the world was at peace and that the battles and assassinations of the past few days had never happened. The location of the banquet was Chinian Hall in the outer city of the palace. The palace maids who carried food and wine to and fro in front of the table were very beautiful. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows and smiled as he watched them bustle about in the grand palace. The palace maids noticed that the young and handsome Fan Xian was looking at them in a different light, and they couldn't help but feel a little shy. Their faint blush grew even redder, and they stole glances at him from time to time. The distinguished guests gathered in front of the hall, but not a single sound could be heard. Many of the kingdom of Qing's guests were ministers and nobles that Fan Xian had never seen before. Only Director Chun and the Prime Minister were absent due to illness. Across from him sat the diplomatic mission of Northern Qi and the diplomatic mission of Dongi. Although Fan Xian's position was low, he was also a deputy, so he was arranged to sit in the middle of the table. Beside him were some senior officials, and he couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable. At that moment, he heard an old man next to him say with a smile, "There are many rules at the banquet, but His Majesty has always been easygoing. Don't be nervous, Master Fan. This old man was Zhang Ziqian, an assistant minister of the Board of Rites. Because Fan Xian had an unresolvable grudge against the Guo family of the Board of Rites, he was secretly wary of this man. But hearing his words, he didn't seem to have any ill intentions. Fan Xian couldn't help but smile shamefully. I've lived in the countryside all my life. I've never seen such a grand occasion. If I've been disrespectful in any way, I hope you can point me out. Zhang Ziqian stroked his long beard and smiled. Ren Shaoqing said in court today that Master Fan had contributed greatly to this negotiation. At this time, no one in court would do anything to you. Just be careful of those people across from you. The two of them looked across and saw Chang Ningho of the Northern Qi diplomatic mission waiting, bored out of his mind. The table in front of them was still empty. Presumably, it was occupied by the elusive Zhuang Mohan. At the head of the Dongyi envoys sat a middle-aged man with a sword strapped to his waist. Fan Xian couldn't help but frown. How could he enter the palace with a sword? His Majesty has personally approved it. The disciples of Sigu's sword school never leave their swords. This is a special case. Zhang Ziqian explained in detail as if he were explaining to a junior. He is Sigu Sword's first disciple, Yin Jilan. Fan Xian sucked in a cold breath and narrowed his eyes. Immediately, he felt a murderous intent naturally emanating from the sword-bearing man. These days, the Qing court had deliberately given the Dongyi envoys the cold shoulder. It seemed that this ninth-level swordsman, Yin Jilan, was not in a good mood. Even sitting in the palace of the Qing kingdom, his entire person was still cold. Fan Xian was looking at Yin Jilan's sword-like brows. Coincidentally, Yin Jilan was also looking at him. Their gazes met like lightning in the air of the palace. A moment later, Fan Xian lowered his head in a show of weakness and gently coughed. The sword intent in his opponent's gaze was too strong. This exchange of glances immediately drew the attention of everyone in the hall. Everyone knew that Fan Xian had killed 2 female disciples of Sigu Sword School on Yolan Street, and that Dongyi had come to pay tribute to clean up the aftermath of that incident. But according to most people's opinions, this swordsman, Yin Jilan, would not mind killing Fan Xian with his sword. Fortunately, the Crown Prince of the Eastern Palace had expressed some goodwill towards Fan Xian through negotiations over personnel arrangements. Thus, no one in the court, regardless of which faction, dared to take pleasure in Fan Xian's misfortune because of this. With a foreign enemy in front of them, all the officials of the Qing kingdom, as well as those in the military, glared fiercely at Yin Jilan. The atmosphere in the entire palace suddenly became tense. Fan Xian's face was expressionless. He lowered his head and adjusted the jinqi in his body, ready at any moment. At this moment, the faint sound of a zither came from the side of the palace. Amidst the solemn palace music, a eunuch loudly shouted, "His Majesty has arrived." The most powerful man in the world, the only master of the Qing kingdom, the emperor, accompanied by the empress, slowly approached from the side. With a warm smile on his face, he stood in front of the dragon throne. Long live the emperor! Long live the emperor! The officials in front of the hall knelt down respectfully, and the guests of the diplomatic mission bowed. The remaining tension in the hall was replaced by an inexplicable sense of solemnity and respect. The emperor sat high above, accompanied by the empress. The crown prince also had a unique seat 2 steps below his parents. Normally, the other princes would not come to such an occasion. The emperor's gaze swept across the officials below. "You may rise," he said warmly. He bowed and rose, and the feast officially began. First, the officials of the Northern Qi diplomatic mission stepped forward. They sang their praises as usual, proclaiming the traditional friendship between the 2 countries, and then retreated. Yun Jilan of Dongyi stepped forward, expressionlessly said a few words, and then also retreated. The empress smiled and whispered in His Majesty's ear, "This man from Dongyi is quite arrogant." The emperor and empress sat high above. Their conversation could not be overheard, so they spoke directly. His Majesty also smiled warmly. If the first disciple of Sigusor did not have the slightest bit of arrogance, I'm afraid he would not even have the courage to hold a sword in my room. The palace maids had long since replaced the hot dishes. The officials buried their heads in their food, not daring to speak. Since His Majesty did not speak, it was naturally quiet. Fan Xian lowered his head in discomfort, but his eyes were undetectable as he glanced at the seat opposite him. The previously empty seat was now occupied by a man. His face was old, but his eyes were clear and spirited. The wrinkles on his forehead seemed to contain a great deal of wisdom. His white robes wrapped around his not-so-tall body like a cloud. Without asking, he knew that this was Zhuang Mohan of Northern Qi. Fan Xian did not know when he had sat down, but he guessed that he had entered at the same time as the emperor. It seemed that the rumors were true. This Zhuang Mohan was greatly appreciated by the Empress Dowager. Perhaps he had been in the palace all this time. When Fan Xian stole a glance at the man, he did not know that the high and mighty couple were also looking at him. The Empress took a sip of wine and indicated where Fan Xian was sitting with her eyes. "That young man is Fan Xian, Princess Qin's future son-in-law," she said quietly. His Majesty smiled. "He looks handsome, and he has some fame in the capital. At court today, Exine Shu and Run Xiao, and the two vice ministers, both praised his talent. I am truly curious as to why the Crown Prince's servant and the Prime Minister's student are so friendly to him." The Empress's smile was a bit forced. Perhaps the Crown Prince understands the importance of popularity? Besides, he is soon to be the Prime Minister's son-in-law. "Oh, popularity?" His Majesty smiled faintly. He did not look at the Empress. Instead, he looked at his son. "It seems that my son also understands the importance of popularity." Although she could hear a trace of dissatisfaction in his voice, the Empress still felt that His Majesty was in a good mood today. He was not only willing to berate the Crown Prince, but also had some positive comments. She could not help but say happily, "Cheng Xian is growing up. He will understand some things." His Majesty smiled wordlessly. After a while, Fan Xian kept drinking, perhaps because he was nervous or for some other reason. This wine was at most a type of millet wine. It was not very strong and tasted sweet and sour. Fan Xian did not think much of it, but in the eyes of the officials next to him, the way this young man drank was like that of a fierce animal. Even the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites, Zhang Ziqian, could not help but remind him, "Sir Fan, don't drink too much. If you make a faux pas in front of His Majesty, that would be a great crime." Hearing the words Sir Fan, he knew that Zhang Ziqian was reminding him that this was not Lu Jing River, but deep in the palace. He was not a guest, but an official. Fan Xian smiled inwardly, but his zhenqi reversed, forcing the drunkenness onto his face. His eyes suddenly became a bit hazy. He lowered his voice and said, "I dare not hide it from you, sir. I'm really nervous. Why don't I quickly drink some wine and relax a bit?" Zhang Ziqian looked at Fan Xian's drunken state, as if he could not hear him clearly. He could only shake his head and smile bitterly. "The Prime Minister claimed to be ill and did not come, and your father did not come either. Instead, he left you in my care. If you really get drunk, how am I supposed to explain it to them?" These days, the diplomatic mission of Northern Qi had been put in a difficult position by the diplomatic officials of the Chamberlain of Dependencies. Seeing Fan Xian's state, they could not help but look at each other and make up their minds. These days, although Fan Xian was the deputy, he had been silent. But the diplomatic mission deeply disliked the mischievous look on his beautiful face. Northern Qi still had many spies in the capital of the Kingdom of Qing. Of course, they knew that the reason the Chamberlain of Dependencies was so powerful this time was all because of the bad ideas of the deputy, Fan Xian. As for what those bad ideas were, no one knew. Now that the negotiations between the two countries had been completed and the royal families of both sides had signed their names, there was no way to go back on their word. But the Northern Qi diplomatic mission still had a big knot in their hearts. Seeing Fan Xian's drunken state, Chang Ningho smiled sinisterly. He stood up and respectfully bowed to the high ground. "Your Majesty, these days the negotiations between the two sides have been tiring. The people of the Chamberlain of Dependencies have also been tiring. I wonder if I could offer a toast to the officials of the Chamberlain of Dependencies to show the friendship between our two countries. When Chang Ningho spoke, the diplomatic mission of Dongyi sat next to them. Naturally, they saw Fan Xian's drunken state and knew what the northern Qi people wanted to do. They only looked on coldly, not joining in the fun. The dragon chair was too high, and the emperor and the empress did not seem to see the undercurrent of the situation. Naturally, they did not notice Fan Xian and laughed. The crown prince also joined in the fun. Chang Ningho naturally wants to enjoy himself to the fullest. Opponents on the battlefield, friends off the battlefield. And of course, at the wine table, we are only opponents. The crown prince actually just wanted to show off his conversational skills, but they were quite ordinary, and he did not know how things would develop. This worried the officials of the Chamberlain of Dependencies. In these days of negotiations, everyone had long since regarded Deputy Fan as one of their own. How could they let the northern Qi people get Deputy Fan drunk? But the two sides were sitting far apart, and there was no way to help. Fan Xian smiled and drank with the northern Qi diplomatic mission, but he felt a faint sense of unease. In recent days, the merchants under the control of the eldest princess had begun to act against Dongbua bookstore, raising the price of paper and lowering the price of books. These two simple moves were enough to make Fan Xija and the 7th Yi shopkeeper very depressed. But Fan Xian knew that the real tricks were still to come, and what he was going to do today required the help of wine. It was difficult not to get drunk, but it was even more difficult to pretend to be drunk. This was the strongest feeling Fan Xian had during his first court banquet. Northern Qi could not hold on any longer. 6 of the 8 ambassadors had fallen, and in the end, even Chang Ningho no longer cared about his status and bravely sacrificed himself, half hanging from Fan Xian's arm. Up until now, the emperor, who had been quietly talking with the empress and Zhuang Mohan, smiled. The palace has not been this lively in a long time. Zhuang Mohan had been silent the entire time, and only occasionally would the emperor ask him a few questions in a quiet voice. He had the air of a famous scholar. Following the emperor's gaze, he seemed to have just noticed the commotion. Looking at the beautiful young man holding Chang Ningho and pouring wine down his throat, he asked curiously, "That young man is Master Fan of the House of Poets?" This world-famous literary master seemed to find it hard to believe his own eyes. The legendary young scholar, who won the fame of poetry with just 3 poems, turned out to be a drunkard. The emperor seemed to be slightly annoyed and raised his voice. "Fan Xian." Everyone in the palace was paying close attention to the movements on the throne, for fear of a moment of carelessness. Therefore, when the emperor spoke, the entire palace quieted down. Not a single sound could be heard, except for the young man called Fan Xian, who was still shouting, "Victory! Victory!" That seemed to be a southern saying. It seemed that young Master Fan really had drunk too much. Fan Xian, seeing that the young man was drunk, the crown prince could not help but rebuke him, suppressing his anger. After all, it was the Eastern Palace who had suggested Fan Xian as a deputy, and it was because of this that Fan Xian had the right to enter the palace that day. Fan Xian had lost face, and in the crown prince's heart, the crown prince felt that he had lost face. As if sensing the strange silence in the palace, Fan Xian stood where he was in a daze. His eyes swept around in a daze, but his beautiful face showed the freedom of drunkenness. "Who's calling me?" All the officials in the court who were on good terms with the Fan family and the prime minister wanted nothing more than to gag his mouth, shove him into a carriage, and throw him back to Fan Manor. To everyone's surprise, the high and mighty emperor did not seem angry after hearing this response, which could only be heard in a restaurant. Instead, he laughed. "I'm calling you." Hearing the word, "I" woke up people, regardless of whether they were really drunk or pretending to be drunk. Fan Xian was no exception. He loosened his grip and hurriedly bowed. I deserve to die. I drank too much." As he loosened his grip, Chang Ningho of Northern Qi, who had been choked by him, went limp and fell to the ground with a thud. The Qing official, seeing the enemy's chief negotiator in such a sorry state, smiled with satisfaction. The only two Northern Qi ambassadors who were not drunk hurriedly helped Chang Ningho back to his seat. A palace maid considerately brought him some soup to sober him up. The emperor reprimanded him. "Of course I know you drank too much. Otherwise, I would have punished you for your lack of etiquette." Fan Xian struggled to maintain his bowed posture. He smiled bitterly and defended himself. "I dare not defend myself, but it is a pleasure to have guests from afar. If I did not properly entertain these important people from Northern Qi as the deputy envoy, I cannot help but fail in my duty." Look, His Majesty turned to the Empress. He still dares not defend himself. If he did, I'm afraid he would say that I made him drink and that he had nothing to do with it. The Empress knew that His Majesty had always loved Princess Chun. She didn't know if he loved her because of her. She smiled. Since she didn't speak up for Fan Xian, she wasn't stupid enough to rebuke him. Fan Xian. This was the third time His Majesty had called out his name in the palace. The officials listened attentively, but in their hearts, they felt something else. It seemed that the relationship between the Fan family and the royal family was not ordinary. His Majesty spoke lightly. The relationship between the Fan family and me is not ordinary. In my eyes, you're only a junior. Regardless of whether we are monarch or official, when I speak, you should keep your sharp tongue shut. Don't think I don't know what you said in the restaurant. At such a young age, do you really think you can look down on the people of this world just because you have a sharp tongue? His Majesty was clearly denouncing him, but he was secretly protecting him. The officials and emissaries were not fools. They understood. As expected, His Majesty spoke quietly. On this late summer night, the monarch and his officials are in harmony, and the friendship between the two nations is strong. Fan Xian, you have always been famous for your poetry. Why don't you compose a poem? The officials all agreed, knowing that His Majesty was giving face to the Fan family. It seemed that His Majesty had a stroke of inspiration. He wanted to use today's banquet as an opportunity to let the officials know what kind of person this 8th-rank functionary of the Fan family was. His Majesty wanted to give Fan Xian a great opportunity to make a name for himself, but Fan Xian was half drunk. He was afraid that he would waste this opportunity. It was a pity. Fan Xian was indeed a little tipsy, but he had clearly heard the conversation in front of the palace. He laughed at himself and bowed in the direction of the dragon throne. "Your Majesty, I only know how to make a fool of myself in front of the great Zhuang Mohan." As soon as he said this, the officials all looked at Zhuang Mohan. Only now did they understand what His Majesty meant. He was not just giving Fan Xian a chance to make a name for himself. He wanted to use this opportunity to prove to the people of this world that in terms of martial arts, the Kingdom of Qing was unparalleled. In terms of writing, the Kingdom of Qing also had a talent that could rival Zhuang Mohan. Fan Xian's name, 10,000 miles sorrowful in autumn, always a guest, had been ringing in the capital for months. It was only after he had insisted on not composing poetry that the name gradually faded. Hearing him push the blame to Zhuang Mohan, the officials thought that he and His Majesty had long since secretly planned to strike a blow at the arrogance of the literary world of Northern Qi. In reality, Fan Xian was only guessing. His experience from his previous life was not enough for him to guess the emperor's heart. But seeing the flourishing style of writing in the Kingdom of Qing, it seemed that His Majesty was not satisfied that he was undefeatable on the battlefield, and that he had always been viewed as a southern barbarian by the people of Northern Qi. After Zhuang Mohan came to the kingdom, he entered and left the palace. Although the Empress Dowager and the other ladies respected him for his literary reputation, His Majesty would probably feel very uncomfortable. Unfortunately, the Kingdom of Qing had no literary masters, and so Fan Xian, a plagiarist, had been innocently pushed onto the stage. Fan Xian knew he had not guessed the emperor's meaning incorrectly. Even from a distance, his powerful eyesight could still see clearly that the emperor's eyes gradually narrowed. There was a glimmer of admiration in the depth of his gaze. This admiration, of course, was for Sir Fan Jr.'s understanding of the emperor's heart. At the same time, it was a warning to compose a good poem and not lose face for the Kingdom of Qing in front of Zhuang Mohan. Why don't you compose a poem and let Mr. Zhuang Mohan evaluate it? If it's not good, you will be punished by drinking wine." The Empress smiled. She knew what the man beside her was thinking, so she made preparations in advance. Now that things had come to this, what else could they do? Fan Xian returned to the table. Not caring that he was already drunk, he poured another cup and savored the slightly sour wine in his mouth. His brows were tightly furrowed. All the officials knew that Master Fan was eager for talent, so they secretly counted on his behalf. When he counted to about 15, a clear light appeared in Fan Xian's eyes. His face was full of smiles. His lips parted slightly as he recited, "Drinking and singing, how long is life? Take the morning dew, for example, the bitter days that go by. Indigo color, leisurely in my heart. But for the sake of the monarch, I have been groaning to this day. I have guests to play the flute and the flute. Clearly like the moon, when will it disappear? At the banquet, the heart remembers old favors. The moon is bright and the stars are sparse. The crows fly south, circling the tree 3 times. Where can they rest? The mountains are not too high. The sea is not too deep. The Duke of Zhou spits out. The world returns to its heart." Just like every time Fan Xian threw out a poem to beat people, this poem made the entire hall quiet. This was the masterpiece of Grandmaster Chao. Fan Xian had deleted a few lines and tossed it out. In this hall, the world returns to its heart, just in line with the Emperor's thoughts. The most amazing thing was that the Duke of Zhou spits out actually existed in this world. Furthermore, this Duke of Zhou was not a follower of the Emperor, but an actual emperor. That was why Fan Xian dared to write out so grandly. After a long time, in the Grand Palace, all the officials cheered in unison, "Good poem." The Emperor showed a satisfied expression and turned to look at Zhuang Mohan. "What does Master Zhuang think of this poem?" he asked quietly. Zhuang Mohan's expression did not change. He did not know how many times he had experienced such a scene in his life, nor how many poems he had appraised. The reason he was respected by all the people, even the Emperor and other officials of the Kingdom of Qing, had read his essays and entered officialdom was because of his virtue and insight. Of course, the most important thing was his vast knowledge. "Good poem," Zhuang Mohan said quietly. He picked up a peanut with his chopsticks and ate it. "It is indeed a good poem. Although the meaning is broken, it wins in its quality. For poetry, the meaning comes first, and quality is the most important. Master Fan's poem is full of quality, and it is indeed a good poem. Who would have thought that the Kingdom of Qing could produce such a talent?" Fan Xian smiled slightly. He did not have any special feelings for this master of the literary world, but he did not like his style. After a slight bow, he returned to his seat, but his steps were a little shaky. The officials in the court were still whispering about Sir Fan Jr.'s earlier poem. Under normal circumstances, this would have been the end of the matter, but the atmosphere in the hall seemed a little strange today. One person said coldly, "What Master Zhuang said earlier about the Kingdom of Qing was inappropriate. Everyone knows that you are a master of writing. But in terms of poetry, you are not necessarily as good as Master Fan, so there is no need to make presumptuous comments. There are many scholars in this court, and Master Fan is one of the best. Not to mention that he wrote a poem in 15 minutes. Just the poem 10,000 Leaves of Sorrowful Autumn is always a guest is enough. I truly do not know, in the kingdom of Northern Qi, which scholar could write such a poem." These words were very inappropriate, especially at a national banquet. It was abnormally rude. The Emperor of Qing had not expected a common literary matter to reach this stage. The Emperor's brows gradually furrowed. He did not know which official had been so rude, but this person was, after all, feeling injustice for the court, and there was no way to punish him. Fan Xian stopped on his way back to the banquet and bowed apologetically to Zhuang Mohan to show that he had not intended to be disrespectful. Zhuang Mohan coughed twice, and with some difficulty, stood up with the help of a young eunuch whom the Empress Dowager had pointed out to him. He looked calmly at Fan Xian. "Master Fan's poetry has long spread to Shangjing of the Kingdom of Qi. I have often recited that 10,000 Leaves of Sorrowful Autumn is always a guest. Fan Xian suddenly saw a trace of pity in the eyes of this master of literature, a trace of decisiveness that cut off all avenues of retreat. Fan Xian's heart suddenly jumped. He felt some danger that he had not been aware of slowly approaching him. He was getting tipsy, but he still turned his head abruptly, and behind the banquet table, he found the face that had started the fight. Guo Baoquan, who had been punched by Fan Xian. Guo Baoquan, the crown prince's close aide. Guo Baoquan was also qualified to sit at the banquet table today. But it was clear that the crown prince had not known about this beforehand. So the crown prince and Fan Xian both narrowed their eyes, looking at Guo Baoquan's faintly smug face, unsure of what he wanted to do. Fan Xian felt the danger and smiled slightly. At that moment, he heard Zhuang Mohan cough twice, and after bowing to the emperor, he said quietly, "I am of the kingdom of Qi, but my heart is in the literature of the world. I do not wish to harm the friendship between the two countries, but there are some things that must be said." His Majesty's expression gradually calmed, and he calmly said, "Master Zhuang, please speak." As His Majesty spoke, the Empress also raised her wine cup, opened her mouth to speak, and then pulled it back. "The wind is urgent, the ape howls in sorrow, the white bird flies back on the clear sand. Boundless falling trees rustle down, the endless great river rolls in. 10,000 li of sorrowful autumn is always a guest, 100 years of illness alone on the stage. Hardship and bitterness hate the thick frost on the temples. The destitute new wine cup stops." The palace was incomparably quiet. No one knew what this master of literature, whose name had shaken the world, would say. The first 4 lines of this poem are excellent. Chapter 135. Hearing the last line, the officials were puzzled. This poem had appeared in the capital in the spring, and had long since spread throughout the land. Aside from the words "great river," which were somewhat uncomfortable to read, many poets had always thought that there was nothing to nitpick about the poem. But the essence of the poem was in the last 4 lines, and they did not know why Zhuang Mohan had said so. Zhuang Mohan said coldly, "The reason why I say the first 4 lines are good is not because the last 4 lines are bad, but because the last 4 lines were not written by Master Fan." As soon as these words were said, there was an uproar in the hall, and then a deathly silence. No one spoke. Fan Xian pretended to be surprised, but he understood many things. He calmed down, and his drunken body leaned against the table, smiling at Zhuang Mohan. A few months ago, Lin Wanner had said that someone in the palace said that his poem was copied. At the time, he did not care, but he did not expect it to explode today. Guo Baoquan had clearly been instructed by some noble to stir up this matter. After he entered the capital, the only thing he could use was his so-called literary reputation. If she completely destroyed his reputation, in a world where literature and virtue were highly valued, he would have no choice but to break off the engagement. After hearing Zhuang Mohan recite the first 4 lines, Fan Xian felt much more at ease. Seeing that Master Zhuang still did not know that the great river was the Yangtze, he knew that what he feared most had not happened. If he wanted to accuse Fan Xian of plagiarism, Zhuang Mohan could only rely on his own knowledge and reputation to suppress others. But he did not know how the eldest princess had persuaded Zhuang Mohan, who had always had a good reputation, to come all the way here to be a villain. After a long time, His Majesty frowned. Plagiarism was a serious accusation. If Zhuang Mohan did not have something to rely on, he would not have dared to make such irresponsible remarks in the palace of the Kingdom of Qing. Words are no proof. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Zhang Ziqian, who had been sitting next to Fan Xian, smiled. Master Zhuang Mohan is a master of his generation. When his students were young, they often studied the scriptures he had written. Naturally, no one in the world would dare to doubt his words. But in this case of plagiarism, perhaps he was deceived by a villain. He glanced at his superior's son, Guo Baoquan, and did not reveal who he was referring to. Zhuang Mohan raised his head. His eyes, which were full of wisdom, were filled with a complicated emotion. The last 4 lines of this poem were written by my master when he was traveling in Tingzhou. Because it was written by my master, I have kept it in my heart for decades. I don't know how Master Fan managed to come across these lines. Originally, I felt that it was good that the dust-burying pearl could see the light of day again. It's just that Master Fan is using this as an excuse to ask for my name, but I won't take it. A scholar's first priority is to cultivate his heart and virtue. I value talent as much as my life, and I do not wish to rashly expose this matter. My original intention was to come to the kingdom of Qing and see what kind of person you are. Who would have thought that Master Fan would not repent? Instead, he has surpassed me. Fan Xian almost laughed in spite of himself. Shameless, he thought, but no one else could laugh. The atmosphere in front of the palace had long become oppressive. If this was true, not only would Fan Xian never have the face to enter the officialdom and literary circles, but the entire Qing court would lose all face. All the scholars in the world respected Zhuang Mohan's moral conduct and writings, and could not bring themselves to doubt him. Furthermore, Zhuang Mohan had said that it was written by his master. Given the hearts of the scholars in the world, this was tantamount to using his master's character as proof. Who would dare to doubt him? Deep in their hearts, the officials had already determined that Fan Xian's poem had been copied. They looked at him with strange disgust, but they could not let this matter become the truth. After all, this involved the face of the kingdom of Qing. So His Majesty looked coldly at Grand Scholar Xu Wu of the Imperial Library. After a moment of awkwardness, Grand Scholar Xu stood up awkwardly and bowed to Zhuang Mohan. Greetings, Master. Grand Scholar Xu had traveled to northern Qi and received instruction from Zhuang Mohan, so they greeted him with the courtesy of a teacher and student. He had long since believed Zhuang Mohan's claim that Fan Xian's poem had been copied. But under His Majesty's stern gaze, he had no choice but to stand up and speak on Fan Xian's behalf. Master Fan has always been talented in poetry. Even his short song was excellent. It is hard to believe that he plagiarized it, and it does not seem necessary. Zhuang Mohan had already sat down. He coughed twice and warmly said, Xu Wu, could it be that you suspect I'm stealing the name of my master? Grand Scholar Xu was sweating profusely and repeatedly said he did not dare. He no longer cared about His Majesty's cold gaze and obediently retreated. At this moment, if anyone still doubted him, it would be tantamount to saying that Zhuang Mohan was a shameless man who had no master or father. No one would dare bear this reputation. But His Majesty was no ordinary scholar. He was not Imperial Consort Xu, nor was he the Empress Dowager. He did not like Zhuang Mohan at all, so he coldly said, the kingdom of Qing values the law. It is somewhat different from the weak state of northern Qi. If Master Zhuang wishes to accuse someone of a crime, then you must have some proof. All the officials could hear that His Majesty was angry. If Zhuang Mohan really did accuse Fan Xian of plagiarism, it would be difficult for Fan Xian to ever see the light of day again. Zhuang Mohan smiled slightly and had his attendant bring out a piece of paper. This is my master's handwriting. If anyone from the Fong family were to look at it, they would naturally know the date. He looked at Fan Xian and said sympathetically, Master Fan is talented in poetry, but he is too preoccupied with drawing tigers. He does not know that poetry is the heart of the heart. How could the last 4 words of this poem, given Master Fan's experiences? Inside the hall, only Zhuang Mohan's slightly aged but incomparably steady voice could be heard interpreting the poem. 10,000 li of sorrow for autumn. How cold it is. 100 years of sickness. It was when my master, in his twilight years, ascended the heights alone. The torrential river filled the eyes with desolation. Master Fan, you are still young. How do you explain this 100 years of sickness? The more Zhuang Mohan spoke, the more everyone felt that such a poem could not have been written by a young man. Then they heard Zhuang Mohan's voice once again. Frost on the temples is a cluster of white hair. Master Fan, with a head of black hair, is a bit too forceful to describe. Finally, Zhuang Mohan said softly, as for the last line, dejected, I stopped drinking from my mug. Let's not talk about Master Fan's glorious family background and how dejected he is, but I'm afraid Master Fan does not understand why my master said these words. He looked at Fan Xian and there seemed to be some pity between his brows. My master contracted a lung disease in his later years, so he could not drink, so he used the words dejected. Hearing this, the officials of the kingdom of Qing finally lost their breath. There was no need for that piece of paper. With these unexplainable problems, it would be difficult for Fan Xian to escape the charge of plagiarism. Suddenly, there was a burst of applause in the quiet palace hall. Fan Xian, who had been leaning over the table in a drunken stupor, suddenly stood up and smiled at Zhuang Mohan. He slowly lowered his hand, and in his heart, he felt a bit of admiration. Naturally, no one knew who this Zhuang Mohan's master was, but for him to be able to deduce the circumstances of Du Fu's life and his illness from this poem, he was truly worthy of the title of the greatest master of literature in the world. But Fan Xian knew that Zhuang Mohan was trying to frame him, and that the piece of paper had probably already been dealt with, so he could not admire him to the end. A trace of madness appeared on his elegant face, and he laughed drunkenly. Today, Zhuang Mohan does not even care about your master's reputation. I really don't know what has made you disregard your former reputation. Others thought that he had lost his mind after being exposed, and that his speech was becoming more and more unbearable. They all frowned. The Empress quietly ordered someone to call in the guards to prevent Fan Xian from doing anything rash. Unexpectedly, His Majesty waved his hand coldly, telling everyone to listen to what Fan Xian had to say. Fan Xian staggered out, his eyes full of ridicule and ridicule. "Bring the wine," he yelled. The palace maids in the back saw his deranged expression and did not dare to come forward. An official, who had been feeling unjust on Fan Xian's behalf, brought over a jar of wine that weighed about 1 kilogram and brought it to Fan Xian. "Thank you." Fan Xian laughed and broke the clay seal on the wine jar. He lifted the jar and drank like a whale drinking from the ocean. In a moment, the wine had been poured into his stomach. After a drunken belch, he felt tipsy. He had drunk a lot that day, and now that he was in a rush to drink, his face was ruddy, his eyes sparkling, and his body swayed uncontrollably. He staggered to the head of the table like he was dancing, and pointed at Zhuang Mohan's nose. "Master, do you really insist on saying this?" Zhuang Mohan smelled the scent of wine and frowned slightly. "It is good that you have a repentant heart. There is no need to hurt yourself like this." Fan Xian looked into his eyes and smiled slightly. His words seemed to be a little unclear. "Everything has a cause and effect. Master Zhuang accused me of plagiarizing my teacher's 4 lines. Why did I copy it? Could it be that I cannot win this fame in life and in death just because of that short song from before?" The words fame in life and in death were very good, and even Zhuang Mohan was moved. His mind was preoccupied with an urgent matter, and he had no choice but to deliberately frame the young man in front of him. He could not bear to do so, and he slowly moved his head away. Perhaps Master Fan also copied this poem. Copied from whom? Could it be that I wrote this poem was copied? Could it be that Master Zhuang's students are all over the world, and his poems are known all over the world, and you have the right to accuse me of plagiarism? Seeing Zhuang Mohan's finger lightly tapping on the scroll on the table, Fan Xian laughed coldly. "Master Zhuang, this kind of trick may work on children, but you say that I copied your teacher's poem. I find it strange that before I wrote it, this poem has never appeared in this world." Zhuang Mohan did not seem to want to argue with him. It was Fan Xian who said in a soft voice, "Master Zhuang, my hair is not white, so I cannot speak of the frost in my temples. My body is healthy, so I cannot speak of 100 years of illness. But you do not know that I have always liked to cause trouble, and I intend to start all over again in this life. You do not know my past, so you wrongly accuse me and harm me. How boring." He did not know whether it was because he had drunk too much, or because he had a rare opportunity to vent his pent-up depression, but Fan Xian's elegant face suddenly had a hint of madness. "Poetry is the heart." Zhuang Mohan looked at him warmly. "My young friend Fan did not have such a past. So how could you write this poem? Poetry is the way of literature." Fan Xian looked at him coldly. "The way of poetry is always about talent. Perhaps my poem is a forced expression of sorrow, But who says that things that have not been experienced cannot be turned into one's own poetry? His words were extremely arrogant. He compared himself to a genius, using this to prove that all of Zhuang Mohan's deductions about poetry did not exist. Hearing this, Zhuang Mohan's eyebrows furrowed slightly. He laughed bitterly. Is Master Fan really capable of writing something that has nothing to do with his own experience? This master did not believe it. Even a genius in poetry would not have such ability. Seeing that the other had fallen into his trap, Fan Xian smiled slightly. He took the wine jug from the other's table and drank a mouthful. He looked at him quietly, the drunkenness in his eyes growing stronger. Suddenly, he waved his sleeve and shouted 3 times. Paper, ink, servants. The drunken man shouted 3 times. Everyone in the hall did not understand what he meant. Only the emperor calmly ordered the serving girls to follow Fan Xian's orders. In a short while, they had prepared everything. There was a large empty space in front of the hall. There was only a table, an inkstone, and a man standing alone and proudly in the center. Fan Xian could not stand still. He forced himself to bow to the emperor. I would like to borrow your majesty's writing eunuch. Although the emperor did not understand, he still lowered his head slightly and allowed it. A writing eunuch walked to the table and sat down. He spread out the white paper and ground the ink. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian resisted the drunkenness and shook his head. One is not enough. Fan Xian, what nonsense are you making? The crown prince, who was sitting close to him, could not help but speak. But the emperor still calmly granted his request. His eyes gradually revealed a smile, as if he had guessed what was about to happen. Fan Xian smiled and looked at Zhuang Mohan. The drunkenness in his eyes grew stronger. He spoke to the 3 eunuchs beside him. I'll read, you write. If you write too slowly and don't copy it, I won't write a second time. The 3 eunuchs became nervous for no reason. Many people were guessing what Fan Xian was preparing to do. How could he make the world, between him and Zhuang Mohan, believe that he was the true poet of his generation? It was not long into the night, and the wind at the end of summer was not very cool. But the atmosphere was like the sound of drums on a battlefield. Wildfire cannot burn. The spring wind blows, it grows again. Chaotic flowers gradually dazzle the eyes. Only the shallow grass can cover the hooves of horses. The sky and the earth are eternal, but this hatred will never end. Without warning, without any preparation, Fan Xian blurted out a paragraph, all of which were written by Bai Juyi. In a short while, there were more than a dozen poems. He stood by the table and gazed out at the night sky outside the palace. He recited all the famous poems that his strange brain could remember. The eunuchs wrote quickly, but they could not keep up with his speed. Everyone was silent, thinking carefully. In the face of endless conspiracies and schemes, under great pressure, he finally exploded. In his madness, he only cared about reciting the poem in his mind. He did not care if the eunuchs remembered it or not, nor did he care if the people around him understood it. The fragrant words from his previous life passed through his thin lips, echoing endlessly in the palace of the kingdom of Qing. Zhuang Mohan's eyes gradually changed in a strange way, and the officials, who had been purely watching the show, could not help but mutter to themselves. They had never heard of any of these poems, but they were truly wonderful sentences. Could it be that they were all written by Master Fan? The sky wishes for snow in the evening, to drink a cup. This was by Letian drinking. Do you not see? Next, it was Tai Bai Lishan's turn to drink. The shadows form 3 people. This was Tai Bai Letian still drinking. But the master can get the guest drunk. This was Tai Bai Letian still drinking. Those who abandoned me yesterday cannot be kept. Those who disturb my heart today is full of worries. This was Tai Bai Letian drinking. The people in the palace no longer cared about their lack of etiquette. Gradually, they sat around Fan Xian, listening to him recite poem after poem. Their faces were full of shock and disbelief. Everyone had ears to listen to a poem. There were many geniuses in the world, but since ancient times, there had never been a scene like this. They had seen poems, but they had never seen one like this. Composing a poem was definitely not like carrying cabbages in a market. But countless lines of poetry poured out of Fan Xian's mouth, as if he didn't need to think about it. It was no different from carrying cabbages. Although some of the lines in these poems were strange, that was because the officials did not know of the illusions of that world. But the officials were still shocked and frightened. These poems, each one was excellent. Fan Xian still did not stop. The officials began to look at Fan Xian strangely. They felt that this elegant young man in front of them was no longer of the mortal world, but a descendant of the heavens. In their fear, the scholars of the Imperial Library, who had long since sobered up, replaced the 3 eunuchs whose wrists were weak. They began to bury their heads and diligently copy the lines of poetry. Sir Fan Jr. had said earlier that he would only say it once. Fan Xian did not know what was happening around him. His eyes remained closed, his mind working quickly. On one hand, he was recalling these lines of poetry, and on the other, he was thinking about what to do next. If the officials knew that he had the spare time to think about other things, they would probably be even more shocked. He felt a little thirsty, so he stretched his hand into the air beside him. A perceptive imperial scholar had already brought wine over and carefully placed it in his hand, afraid to disturb his current mood. From the Book of Songs about a gentleman's desire for sex, to Gong Zizhen's silence of 10,000 horses, the bright moonlight of the Tang dynasty, the spring river of the Song dynasty, Du Fu building a thatched hut, Su Dompa cooking Huangzhou fish, Du Mu visiting a prostitute, Lu Sanbian also visiting a prostitute, Yuan Zhen once having a mistress, an embroidered zither thinking about his youth, and Ouyang Xiu loving his niece to death. Fan Xian closed his eyes, took a sip of wine, and composed a poem. 3 jugs of wine, 300 poems. In the spacious palace, there seemed to be countless lights and shadows dancing, gradually condensing into a picture that he could only see clearly with his eyes closed. It was the family of poets from his previous life, the old handsome man and the young handsome man from his previous life, singing under the bamboo, bearing their bellies on the bed, walking on the great path in the pavilion, and weeping by the river. This was everything from his previous life. Everything from Fan Xian's previous life had suddenly descended upon the world of the kingdom of Qing, striking at everyone's hearts. Fan Xian, with the help of countless heroes from his previous life, was battling Zhuang Mohan. He suddenly opened his eyes and looked coldly at Zhuang Mohan, but it was as if he was looking at some distant world. Do you not see? The waters of the Yellow River come from the heavens. Who could be more free and easy than Li Bai? The waves wash away the heroes of the ages. Who could be more heroic than Su Shi? Last night's rain was light and the wind was strong, and a deep sleep did not dispel the lingering wine. Who could be more graceful than Li Qingzhao? How could the heroes of the ages be defeated by one man? With a crisp clang, Zhuang Mohan's trembling hands could no longer hold onto the wine cup. The cup fell to the stone floor, shattering into countless pieces. Silence. Silence. After some time, Fan Xian finally stopped his crazy performance, but the people in the great hall of the kingdom of Qing's palace were still unable to shake off their emotions. The scholars and eunuchs, who had already been replaced a few times, were the first to wake up. They fell to the ground, rubbing their sore right hands, looking at Fan Xian as if he were a god. Fan Xian had drunk too much. He staggered over to Zhuang Mohan, stretched out a finger to point at his nose, and shook it. After a drunken hiccup, he said softly, "In interpreting scriptures, I am not as good as you. In writing poetry, you are not as good as me." The hall was still silent, so although these words were spoken very softly, they fell clearly into everyone's ears. The officials, of course, believed these words. They had long since prostrated themselves in admiration of Sir Fan Jr.'s poetic talent. No matter how high Zhuang Mohan's reputation was, when it came to poetry, anyone who had heard Fan Xian recite 300 ancient poems would never believe that anyone could surpass Fan Xian in poetry. At this time, there was no need to bring up the matter of plagiarism. Everyone had long believed Fan Xian's words. There were so-called geniuses in this world, People who did not need to experience certain things, and yet could still write astonishing poems. What was that just now? That was the skill of immortals in poetry. Copy my ass, attack my ass. Since no one believed that Fan Xian, with his talent, would still copy poetry, then naturally Zhuang Mohan was lying. At this time, everyone in the hall looked at Zhuang Mohan with disappointment, pity, and disdain. They thought that this great master of his generation, who had lived half his life with a clean reputation, had unexpectedly fallen short of virtue in his old age, fighting for fame with a younger generation. Zhuang Mohan looked at Fan Xian as if he were looking at a monster. His eyes revealed a gloomy expression, and for some reason, his chest suddenly tightened. He covered his mouth with his white sleeve and spat out a mouthful of blood. The emperor's expression was one of a smile that was not a smile. He looked at Fan Xian and said, "With such talent, why don't you show it normally?" Fan Xian seemed drunk, but not drunk. He looked back at the emperor and said, "Poetry is something to cultivate one's character, not a skill to fight bravely." These words were a little shameless. Wasn't he fighting bravely and ruthlessly tonight? Fan Xian finally could not hold back his complaints and the smell of alcohol. He fell on the steps in front of the emperor. He squinted at Zhuang Mohan, whose lips were trembling slightly. He mumbled, "I am drunk and want to sleep. Go to hell." Finally, he finished his last pose of Li Tai Bai's, and Fan Xian fell into a drunken dream at the emperor's feet. Chapter 136. That night, it was destined to be an unusual one. Fan Xian had gone mad with poetry, and the great Zhuang Mohan had quietly left. His Majesty had made it clear that he wanted to cultivate the eldest son of the Fan family, and the crown prince's position was secure. There was too much information that night, so whether it was the diplomatic mission from Dongyi or the various ministers, when they returned to their manors, they discussed what they had seen with their aides or colleagues. But what shocked everyone the most, and what they discussed the most, was, of course, the 8th-level functionary Fan Xian's performance in front of the palace. In the end, they all came to a common conclusion. Sir Fan was truly a poet. Some people wondered if Fan Xian had composed so many poems over the years, and then released them all in one night. After all, the circumstances of these poems were different, and the feelings were different. If it was said that he had wandered between such different and intense emotions in one night, and could still form naturally, then the poet would probably go crazy. But no matter which one it was, everyone still believed that Fan Xian was not an ordinary person. Nonsense. What ordinary person could bring out so many good poems like they were cabbages? Even if you were not afraid of getting tired, you still had to be able to grow them. In short, in the world close to the kingdom of Qing, all the beautiful, passionate, or gloomy literary works had been unwillingly or willingly brought down by Fan Xian's mouth. From then on, they had become an inseparable part of the spirit of this world. There were some parts of the poems that people did not understand, and they all took it as Sir Fan's inarticulate speech after drinking too much. They were waiting for him to sober up and ask for advice. As for whether Fan Xian would have to cover up his lies, and thus be forced to write a comprehensive history of China and write the 4 great masterpieces, or whether he would have to castrate himself to avoid trouble, that was a matter for another time. On the carriage back to Fan Manor, Fan Xian was still sleeping soundly. Later, some busybody did some calculations for him. That night at the palace banquet, not to mention how many poems he had composed, he had drunk no less than 9 liters of royal wine. So when his poems were destined to intoxicate many scholars, he himself was already drunk to the point of unconsciousness. He was carried out of the palace by the eunuchs under the feet of His Majesty. His body reeked of alcohol, and he was full of complaints. Fortunately, he did not faint in front of the people who looked at him as if he were an immortal. On the carriage of Fan Manor, the eunuchs in the palace carefully instructed the servants of Fan Manor to take good care of their master. The masters had all spoken. This master's head was the treasure of the kingdom of Qing, and they did not dare to damage it. The carriage arrived at Fan Manor. The well-informed members of Fan Manor had long since known that their young master had won a great deal of glory in front of the palace. He had slapped Zhuang Mohan in the face, and everyone in the manor shared his glory. The personal attendant happily carried him off the carriage. Madame Lu personally cleared the way and sent him to his bedroom. Then, she personally went to the kitchen to cook some soup to sober him up. Fan Ro was worried that the maid was not careful enough, so she carefully wrung the towel and wet his dry lips. Fan Xija, who had been woken up by the noise, rubbed his sore eyes. He looked at his unconscious, drunk brother with jealousy and admiration. Count Sinan, Fan Jian, was in his study with a smile on his face. Even the uneducated servants could read his master's expression. He wondered what he should write in his memorial to His Majesty. His Majesty should not be surprised by what had happened to Fan Xian. After all, he was the child of Tianmai. The night gradually grew dark. After a period of excitement, everyone gradually dispersed, not daring to disturb Fan Xian from his drunken dreams. At that moment, he suddenly opened his eyes and said to his sister, who was standing by his bed, "In my belt, there is a light green pill." Ruo saw that he had woken up, and without any time to ask questions, she hurriedly took out the pill from her belt and carefully fed it to him. Fan Xian closed his eyes for a long time, slowly circulating his jinqi. He found that the hangover pill was indeed miraculous. There was no longer any discomfort in his chest, nor was there a trace of drunkenness in his brain. Of course, he was not really drunk. Otherwise, when he was reciting in the palace hall, he would have accidentally read out the original author of the poem. That would have been wonderful. I'm worried that someone will come to see me in the middle of the night. After all, I should be drunk and not sober. Fan Xian frowned as he put on his night clothes with his sister's help. His eyes were clear. He had not been as drunk as he had been in the palace. It shouldn't be. I told them that I would take care of you tonight. Fan Ro knew what he was going to do and couldn't help but worry. Lady Lu, Fan Xian frowned. Will she come and take care of me? I'll watch here. No one should come in. Fan Ro looked at his eyes worriedly. But you'd better hurry. Fan Xian touched the dagger in his boot, the 3 needles in his hair, and the pill at his waist. He confirmed that he was fully equipped and nodded. I'll hurry. He walked from the back of the manor to the mansion where the wedding was being prepared. By now, he was already dressed in night clothes. Under the cover of the night, it would be difficult to see him. Only when he moved, the black light that came with his rapid movements gave him a ghostly feeling. He crawled out from under the wall of the courtyard, where a carriage was already parked. Fan Xian frowned slightly. Although there was no curfew in the capital, the streets were still strictly guarded at night. After the incident on Yolan Street, the city patrol had been badly shaken, so they were now especially vigilant. So he temporarily gave up on the idea of using a carriage. With a shake of his body, he circulated his jinqi throughout his body and immediately sped up, disappearing into the darkness of the capital. Fan Manor was not far from the royal palace. Before long, Fan Xian had reached the foot of the western side of the royal palace. That was where the servants of the palace intersected with the inner city. Usually, it was lively, but now that night had fallen, it had become quiet. Using the short trees as cover, he lowered his body and leapt to the side of the Yudai River. His left hand hooked onto the stone railing by the riverside, and his whole body moved forward like a koala. The lights in front of him were bright, but the river seemed very dark. Fan Xian did not dare to be careless. Relying on the endless jinqi in his body, he held his breath and carefully moved his body. After an indeterminate amount of time, he finally bypassed 2 arched bridges and came to a quiet forest on the side of the palace. Fan Xian relaxed a little and opened his mouth to take a few quick breaths. He felt his body gradually become excited, as if he was enjoying this dangerous activity. The palace wall next to the forest was at least 15 meters tall, and its surface was extremely smooth. There was no place for him to put his weight on. Even the strongest martial artists in the world could not leap over it. Of course, for the few who had already reached the level of a grandmaster, whether or not this high wall would have any effect remained to be tested in practice. Fan Xian was not one of the 4 grandmasters, but he had other methods. The scarlet wall in front of him looked somewhat blue in the dark, like a shadow, he skimmed from the forest to the wall. He found a dark corner where the palace lanterns could not illuminate. Forcing himself to calm down, he sat cross-legged and slowly turned the tyrannical Jinchi in his body through the snowy mountain into warm threads of qi, adjusting the condition of his body. In the depths of the palace, not far from Hongguang Palace, Hong Xixiang sat quietly in his room. The Empress Dowager was not feeling well that day. She had heard the emperor talk about the funny things that had happened at the court banquet. When she heard that Zhuang Mohan had been angered to the point of vomiting blood by Fan Xian, the Empress Dowager could not help but laugh. But for some reason, she seemed to share the sorrow of old people, and so she had gone to bed early. Hong Xixiang had been in the palace for decades, and the young eunuchs did not know how old he really was. They guessed that he was at least 70 or 80 years old. In any case, Hong Xixiang's only duty in the palace was to keep the Empress Dowager company. He had been here since the founding of the Kingdom of Qing. When he was young, he liked to wander outside the palace. As he grew older, he realized that there was not much difference between the inside and the outside of the palace. Hong Xixiang picked up a peanut, put it into his mouth, and chewed it. Then he picked up a small glass of wine and took a sip with enjoyment. The oil lamp on the table was dim. The old eunuch thought of Fan Xian's drunken madness in the palace today, and he could not help but smile. Even if he was a eunuch, he was still a eunuch of the Kingdom of Qing. Eunuch Hong was in a good mood to be able to make the people of northern Qi suffer. On the other side of the palace, the emperor's study was lit with candles. Naturally, it was much brighter than the eunuch's rooms. The current emperor was a diligent ruler who loved his people, so he often read memorials at night. The eunuchs had long gotten used to it. They just kept a midnight snack with warm water, waiting to be summoned. It was late at night after the banquet in front of the palace, but the emperor was still diligent. He sat in front of the table, holding a brush in his hand. The tip of the brush was stained bright red, like a knife that killed silently. Suddenly, the tip of the brush stopped above the memorial, and his brows gradually furrowed. The eunuch holding the brush said carefully, "Is your majesty tired? Why don't you take a break?" The emperor laughed. "Tonight in the palace, did you not break your hand copying poetry?" The eunuch pursed his lips and smiled. "The kingdom produces talented poets. I would love nothing more than to copy poetry like this every day." The emperor smiled and did not say anything more. He only occasionally lifted his head to look out the window, feeling that there was something strange in the dark. The palace was large, and it was quiet in the summer. The serving girls half closed their eyes, feeling sleepy, but they did not dare to sleep. The guards were carefully guarding the outer city, but the inner palace was peaceful. In the corner, next to the fake mountain, Wu Zhu, wearing a brand new set of light brown clothes, melded into the night. The only thing that could be seen was his eyes, which were covered by the black cloth. His entire body seemed to have become an existence very similar to the inanimate objects around him with the help of some kind of method. His breathing and heartbeat had slowed to an extreme, moving in harmony with the gentle night wind around him. Even if someone walked past him, if they did not deliberately look in that direction, it would probably be difficult to notice his existence. Wu Zhu looked at the light in the emperor's study for who knew how long. Then, he slowly lowered his head, put on the black hood, and silently walked in the other direction of the palace. The route he took was very ingenious. He avoided the light and used the terrain to move. He followed the grass and flowers, entered the mountains without a trace, patrolled the lakes without a sound, and was as terrifying as a ghost. It was as if he was taking a leisurely stroll through the heavily guarded palace. Chapter 137. The oil lamp in the room suddenly flickered. This was supposed to be a good sign, but Hong Xixiang's silver eyebrows fluttered, as if he were dissatisfied. His old right hand steadily picked up a fried peanut with chopsticks. Without too much movement, he slowly swallowed the peanut paste in his mouth, tasted the fruit between his teeth, and picked up a cup of wine to drink. Only then did he stand up. It's been many years since anyone has come to this palace. Eunuch Hong's eyes were a little cloudy. He looked out the window with a somewhat listless expression, and then he gently flicked his fingers. The door to the courtyard was open. Like two strong bows, the pair of chopsticks in Eunuch Hong's hands were stimulated by a powerful and profound qi. Almost at the same time, the chopsticks smashed the window in front of them and shot straight into the dark corner of the door, towards Wu Zhu's face. The chopsticks carried the wind with them, and the momentum was astonishing. If one was hit, it would be like being shot by two strong bows. Eunuch Hong's casual flick of his fingers had such godly power. It was truly terrifying. For some reason, Wu Zhu's reaction seemed to be a little slower than usual. Unable to turn around in time, the chopsticks tore through the clothes on his right shoulder. Swish! The chopsticks stuck into the mud at an angle, the ends of the chopsticks moving slightly. Outside the courtyard, Eunuch Hong looked at the brown-robed guest in front of him. His eyebrows twitched slightly. His face was completely covered by a hood, and it was impossible to see his face clearly. "Who are you?" Eunuch Hong's face was full of smiles. He looked like a lowly servant, but it was clear that he was much more frightening than he appeared. Wu Zhu's brown clothes tonight were brand new, so it felt a little strange. Following Fan Xian's plan, he raised his head as if staring at the other person, then said in a hoarse voice, "Sorry, this is a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding? Are you saying you got lost?" Old Eunuch Hong smiled even more happily. "You're the first person to get lost and come to the Imperial Palace. 5 days ago, you should have come here once. I have been waiting for you. I'm very curious about who you are. I think, other than those few old friends of mine, no one else would have the guts to come here." Wu Zhu forced a note of panic into his voice, but he was not good at hiding his emotions, so it sounded fake. "I am bound by my country, and have no choice but to enter. It is not convenient for me to greet you with my true face. I hope you will forgive me." Old Eunuch Hong furrowed his brows, no longer beaming with joy. The other party claimed to be a junior, which meant that he was nothing more than a disciple of one of those old monsters. Judging from the other party's skills, he was at least at the 9th level, which was why he was able to sneak into the palace without being discovered. However, the other party's voice was obviously altered by deliberately twisting the muscles in his throat, so he couldn't get any useful information from his accent. "This is the Imperial Palace, child." Eunuch Hong sighed. "Do you think you can come and go as you please?" Having said this, he opened his right hand. His entire body began to slide on the ground. Suddenly, he was in front of Wu Zhu. His withered hand pressed toward Wu Zhu's face. Wu Zhu's face was expressionless under the black cloth, but he knew that his opponent had misjudged his abilities. This was a great opportunity to kill him, to kill or not to kill. In the past, this would not have been a problem for Wu Zhu, but tonight it was a problem. His brain calculated very quickly. He immediately calculated that even if he killed him now, he would probably have to pay a price. Most importantly, it could alert the other guards in the palace, which would create a lot of trouble for Fan Xian's subsequent actions. So he took a step back, bent his knees, and raised his elbow. Under his elbow was a very ordinary fine steel sword. The sword's radiance shot up from his elbow and pierced straight at Eunuch Hong's wrist. The calculation was perfect. More importantly, the dazzling sword intent contained in the sword actually caused the person the tip of the sword was pointing at to momentarily lose his sense of propriety. But Eunuch Hong was no ordinary person. He laughed sinisterly, and with a shrill voice, he shouted, looking to the left. There was a hint of surprise in his voice, but his movements were not slow. His left hand shot out from his sleeve like a dragon, slamming toward Wu Zhu's chest. This palm came with the wind, and the power of the palm was powerful. It was the world's most powerful technique. Wu Zhu took another step back, straightened his knees, and raised his elbow. The green sword between his elbow was placed horizontally in front of him, as if he were cutting his throat, but it was just enough to protect his chest, and it was ingeniously enough to block Eunuch Hong's withered palm. Looking to the front, Eunuch Hong's voice grew sharper. He pulled back his palm, and from his waist up, his whole body began to tremble. It looked very strange. After a muffled grunt, the old eunuch turned his decades of Jinshi cultivation into countless streams of air, which shot forward, trying to bind Wu Zhu. But Wu Zhu did not give him the opportunity. He coldly took 2 more steps back. These 2 steps seemed simple, but in the face of such a top expert, it was like taking a leisurely stroll in a courtyard. He just happened to avoid the threat of a strong attack. But his body swayed, and it was clear that he had been disturbed by Eunuch Hong's decades of Jinqi. Eunuch Hong's wrinkles deepened. He looked at him coldly and said, "Don't think that you can fool the world just because you changed the direction of your sword. In this forbidden palace, since I have taken a liking to you, you can stay." Wu Zhu slightly raised his head and looked at him. He did not know what to feel, but his next step was to cup his hands. Eunuch Hong frowned in surprise. There was a rustling sound. Wu Zhu turned his body, as if Eunuch Hong did not exist behind him. He carried his sword behind his back and ran in the direction of the palace wall. His whole body moved at an incredible speed. He ran on the grass, turning into a cloud of dust. Carrying his sword behind his back was a very simple posture, but it was a perfect defense. Looking to the back, a gloomy light suddenly appeared in Eunuch Hong's eyes. He did not call for the palace guards. His arms shook, and his whole body looked like a thin black bird with an extremely wide wingspan. He chased after Wu Zhu. In just a moment, the 2 of them, one in front of the tall palace wall, came one behind the other. Eunuch Hong looked coldly at the man in brown in front of him. He wanted to see how he could jump over the wall. Wu Zhu rushed directly to the bottom of the palace wall. He did not slow down in the slightest. His right foot stomped hard on the stone at the bottom of the wall. The stone immediately sank into the mud. One could imagine how terrifying the power of this stomp was, and his whole body's forward speed was changed by this shock into an upward force. His whole body was thrown into the air, along the dark palace wall in the night, like a ghost. With this leap, he had already covered a distance of 30 feet. Just as he was about to fall, there was a swish. The ordinary sword in his hand, for some reason, had pierced deep into the wall. His body borrowed the power of the sword, flipped over, and like a stone, he was thrown out of the high wall. Eunuch Hong gave a muffled grunt. Only now did he realize that his opponent had calculated everything. Jinqi rushed out of his body, and just as he was about to hit the palace wall, he also floated up. But his posture was graceful, and he relied on a breath of Jinqi. Compared to Wu Zhu's ruthlessness, he looked much more at ease. Leaping up to 30 feet, the skinny old eunuch gently extended a finger and pressed it against the hole left by Wu Zhu's sword. Using the force, he flew out of the palace wall. Like a large bird in the night, he slowly floated down the smooth outer wall of the palace wall. As he floated down, his eyes were like an eagle's, fixed on the brown silhouette moving at an incredible speed in the darkness of the capital. With a sinister smile, he quietly floated past the treetops, past the residences, and followed. The battle between the 2 top experts didn't make any sound, so the guard in the palace didn't notice anything. Sitting cross-legged like a mouse in the darkness under the palace wall, Fan Xian slightly tilted his head to listen to the faint sound of the wind. He stood up, gently wiped the grass and dust from his buttocks, and pressed his hands against the smooth palace wall. He did not have Wu Zhu's strong body, nor did he have Eunuch Hong's profound Nigong cultivation. But the way he used Jinqi was different from that of all the strong martial artists in the world. He could even climb the moss-covered cliff outside Danzhou, let alone this palace wall. This was Fan Xian's greatest advantage. His entire body was like a flightless bat, slowly climbing up the palace wall. Although slow, it was very steady, and there was no way he would fall. If it was suddenly daytime, and someone was watching from afar, they would certainly see an ugly black dot on the vermilion palace wall. Climbing over the palace wall, he carefully avoided possible hidden sentries. Finally, Fan Xian's feet safely stepped onto the palace grass. While meditating outside the palace wall, he had already gone over the palace map he had designed in his mind a few times. Now, standing in the palace, looking at the huge palace complex under the night sky, and listening to the faint sound of the clock in the distance, Fan Xian's heart was a little nervous, but also a little excited. At this moment, the map seemed to have become a clear path for his eyes. After a final breath adjustment, he disappeared into the darkness of the imperial palace. Not only did he not make a single sound, he did not slow down in the slightest. Relying entirely on his memory, he used the cover of the rockery and flowers to advance towards his destination. His method was very similar to Wu Zhu's, but there were some subtle differences. After all, his ability to calculate was still not as good as Wu Zhu's. It was already late at night, and most of the people in the palace were asleep. Fan Xian hid in the darkness outside Hongguang Palace and confirmed that there were no aces in the inner palace. The real armed guards seemed to be in the front hall and the corner tower. This knowledge made him frown. The palace guards were so weak, it was a very risky thing to do. If Northern Qi sent a large number of aces to invade, what would he do? As a thief who broke into the Forbidden Palace at night and still worried about the country and its people, Fan Xian was truly a wonderful person. But his calculations were actually a little unnecessary. In this world, the only people who could jump over a 15-meter wall without alerting the guards were those who stood at the very top of the world. If such a grandmaster came, the ordinary guards would not be of much use. He had forgotten that he was the only one who knew Spider-Man's kung fu. Eunuch Hong lived too close to Hongguang Palace. If Eunuch Hong returned to the palace, it would be difficult for Fan Xian to put the copied key back. Finally, the locksmith finished his work, sweating profusely. He handed the key to Fan Xian. Fan Xian compared the two keys and found that the copied key was exactly the same. Even the rust on it was almost identical. He finally relaxed a little. He smiled and asked, "What did you do before?" His face was covered with a black cloth, so his smile looked a bit strange. I was a thief." The locksmith was sweating profusely. He didn't know what he had to face after completing such a secretive task. Fan Xian thought to himself, so it's someone in the same line of work. He squinted at the tools and molds left on the table and frowned. He walked to the table and grunted. Tyrannical Jinshi rushed out of his body and smashed all the molds in his hands. He told Wang Qinian to destroy the metal tools as well and send the locksmith south for a while. Only then did Fan Xian relax and return to the palace. He re-entered Hongguang Palace. The sweet fragrance had faded, but the night breeze was still gentle. The atmosphere of peace and harmony filled the palace. Like a ghost, Fan Xian slid under the bed and put back the copied key. He took out the adhesive he had brought with him and rearranged the secret compartment. Only then did he quietly leave the palace. Fan Xian didn't know how long it had been since the last bell rang. He knew it was time for him to leave. But at that moment, his eyes fell on a small courtyard on the other side of the palace. It was Guangxin Palace, where the eldest princess lived. Fan Xian's plan for today had been perfect. If he didn't want to complicate things, he should have immediately left the palace and waited for things to gradually develop. Perhaps it was the joy of obtaining the key that got to his head, or for some other reason. Fan Xian's next move was somewhat unexpected. He believed that under the cover of darkness, even in a palace as strict as the palace, he would still be able to walk freely. Walking along the corridors, Wu Zhu and Fei Jie, the two masters of darkness, relied entirely on their nocturnal abilities. With great difficulty, they approached Guangxin Palace. Along the way, they even brushed past a yawning palace maid. Guangxin Palace was still lit. It was obvious that there were people inside. Guangxin Palace was different from the other palaces in the palace. There was a small wall outside the palace. As the saying goes, if you've already crossed the river, what's there to be afraid of? But Fan Xian knew that many masters eventually died at the hands of mediocre people. So he carefully circled to the back of the palace, closed his eyes, and climbed up the thick pillar. His palm fell on the smooth surface of the pillar. Fan Xian had used up too much of his Jinshi that day. He couldn't help but feel flustered and impatient, so it was a bit difficult to climb up. Carefully, he climbed to the roof of Guangxin Palace. He didn't dare to open the roof tiles to peek. Instead, he squinted his eyes and looked for the hard-to-find bright tiles among the glazed tiles. Perhaps his luck was too good. The roof of the royal palace did not need bright tiles, but the eldest princess was someone who liked daylight. So Fan Xian found one and carefully crouched down, lowering his head to ensure that each simple movement was stable and did not make any noise. Under the bright tile, the light was not bright, but with Fan Xian's eyesight, he could still see and hear clearly. He squinted, knowing that he had guessed correctly, and his luck was good. The eldest princess, Li Yunrui, reclined on the couch. Her face was languid, and she looked charming. She only wore a white robe. Under the thin silk, the curves of her body were revealed. There was a hint of youth in her maturity. If any man in the world were to see her, they would probably bow down to her bare feet. As the emperor's closest sister, she didn't need to use her beauty to seduce him. And the man in front of her was 70 years old. Before tonight, he was known as the world's foremost scholar of morality. He wasn't someone who could be seduced. Zhuang Mohan coughed twice. My business is done. I hope the eldest princess will not break the agreement. The eldest princess played with the fake scroll that she had spent a fortune to make. She smiled sweetly, filling the room with spring. In a soft and timid voice, she said, I want Master Zhuang to trample Fan Xian to the ground so that he will no longer have the face to stay in the capital. Can you do that? Chapter 139. Zhuang Mohan smiled. By framing him today, I have staked 70 years of my reputation on the line. If I lose, I am willing to accept the consequences. What I do not understand is that Master Fan is like a celestial being in poetry. If you had told me earlier, I would not have humiliated myself. The eldest princess sighed. I did not expect that child to have such a demented temperament in addition to his reputation for poetry. Zhuang Mohan closed his eyes, a look of regret on his face. After a while, he said slowly, I am not regretting anything else. I'm only lamenting that I have been sober for half my life. Now that I am old, I have done such an ugly thing. If Master Fan hadn't written 300 poems in one night, perhaps the people of the world would have believed that Master Fan was a shameless plagiarist because of what I said. The old man opened his eyes. They were calm and clear again. He smiled. That is fine. Fine? The eldest princess's bare feet slid gently along the edge of the couch. She bit her lip and said bitterly, Master Zhuang, Mother has always respected your talent and virtue. That is why I invited you to live in the palace. I have fulfilled my promise to you. What about your promise to me? Do you think that the agreement between the two countries has been signed and that your brother will soon be welcomed back home, that Fan Xian will be able to preserve his reputation, and that you, old fox, will feel at ease? Zhuang Mohan smiled. A mistake is a mistake. My heart belongs to my family. That is why I fell into the eldest princess's trap and came to Qing. My brother has killed countless people in the first half of his life. If the eldest princess wishes to go back on her word, there is nothing I can do. I can only pray for him after I return to Northern Qi. I hope that he will live a more comfortable life in the prison of the Overwatch Council. The eldest princess smiled. I sold Yin Bingyun to your student, the Emperor. That was the only way you could bring Xiao In back to Northern Qi. This deal was not between you and me, but between your Emperor and me. But I have already fulfilled my end of the bargain, and you have not done what you promised me. Tonight in the palace, if you had not pretended to spit out blood and admitted defeat, but instead insisted that Fan Xian's poem was a copy, who knows what would have happened. So, Master Zhuang, after you return, remember to send a message to your Emperor's students. Northern Qi owes Guangxin Palace a favor. Zhuang Mohan smiled. Master Fan is talented, and his poetic ability is beyond the reach of ordinary people. I believe the eldest princess has also guessed that this Master Fan is a Tianmai who has not appeared in the world for a long time. I am very curious. The kingdom of Qing has a Tianmai. Why is it that they are not in a hurry to protect him? Instead, they want to get rid of him. What's more, even if he were to accuse Master Fan of plagiarism, what harm would it cause him? The eldest princess said lightly, I have never believed in the nonsense of a Tianmai being. Master Zhuang is well-read and should know what the saints say. If Fan Xian was some Tianmai person, If his ability was only in reciting poetry and such small things, what good would it do the Qin court? As for why I want to deal with him, that has nothing to do with you. Zhuang Mohan had staked decades of his life on the peerless position he held in the hearts of the world's scholars. He wanted to trample Fan Xian underfoot, and it was all because of the eldest princess. But he did not know the complicated relationships in the Qin court, nor did he know that the eldest princess and Fan Xian would become mother-in-law and son-in-law in the near future. But Fan Xian knew why the eldest princess wanted to deal with him. He half-knelt on the roof of the palace. His 3 fingers on the tiles were a little cold. Looking at the charming princess in her early 30s below the bright tiles, the coldness in his eyes gradually increased. When Guobaoquan spoke in the hall, Fan Xian knew that the nobles of the palace had joined forces with Zhuang Mohan to drive him out of the capital. The matter of plagiarism seemed like a small matter, but it involved the so-called character. If he had not been talking about poetry in the hall and shocked the entire hall, perhaps everyone would have believed Zhuang Mohan's words. He had become a literary thief. Although he would not be punished, and his career could be discussed later, his marriage with Wanner might fall through. The eldest princess knew better than he did what the Empress Dowager did not like. What chilled Fan Xian even more was that the former head spy of Northern Wei, Xiao En, in a secret agreement between the two countries, was Zhuang Mohan's elder brother. In order to persuade Zhuang Mohan to come to the Qin kingdom to suppress him, the eldest princess did not hesitate to sell the head spy of the Qin kingdom stationed in northern Qi, the son of a court official, Yin Bingyun, to the enemy country. She was too daring. How could the emperor in the palace tolerate his own sister doing such a thing that harmed the country's integrity? The summer night breeze blew through the eaves of Guangxin Palace, calming the frowning Fan Xian. He knew that even if he heard these secrets, he could not use them to threaten her. She was the emperor's sister and the Empress Dowager's favorite daughter. These 2 identities alone were enough for her to run amok in the Qin kingdom, selling out officials for her own personal gain. Fan Xian looked at the woman's jet-black hair on the couch below and felt a wave of disgust. This woman was not only crazy, but also perverted. At this moment, Fan Xian seemed to see the whole plot clearly. The agreement between the eldest princess and the emperor of northern Qi was to sell out the head spy of the Overwatch Council, Yin Bingyun, who had been undercover in northern Qi for 4 years, in exchange for Xiao, En, and Sea Lily. The price northern Qi offered was to invite the world-famous Zhuang Mohan to the capital of the Qin kingdom and use his mouth to destroy Fan Xian. At the same time, they could use this to teach a lesson to the Overwatch Council, which had never listened to the eldest princess. However, he didn't know what else was included in the agreement between her and the emperor of northern Qi. Fan Xian guessed that by selling off the head spy of the Qin kingdom in northern Qi, the eldest princess must have obtained more than this. She must have obtained something even more terrifying. Did the emperor know what his own sister was doing? He touched the hard key at his waist, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He thought of a way to deal with this, adjusted his breathing in the night wind, and began to retreat. The palace was too dangerous, and he did not know how long his good luck would last. Just as he stepped off the pillar, he saw 2 people slowly approaching from the end of the corridor, holding palace lanterns. Fan Xian's heart trembled, and he carefully hid his body in the shadow of the pillar. As the lanterns neared, he moved his feet subtly, keeping his body in the same area as the shadows. He secretly prayed that this serving girl would be like the one who had passed by him earlier and would not discover him. The serving girl had already walked past the pillar, and Fan Xian had already moved to the other side of the pillar. Suddenly, the palace maid stopped. This palace maid seemed to have some status in Guang Xian Palace. She whispered something to the little girl who was following her. The little girl responded sweetly and left. The middle-aged palace maid stood and waited. The distance between her and Fan Xian was only 1 wooden pillar. Fan Xian carefully adjusted his breathing with Jinshi, gradually matching the breathing of the serving girl behind the pillar. At the same time, he heard with some peace of mind that there was no change in the serving girl's breathing. It seemed that she had stopped here by coincidence and had not discovered him. The two of them were still separated by a wooden pillar. Suddenly, a cold light flashed in Fan Xian's eyes, which were not covered by his black mask. His entire body twisted a few inches to the left. This innate sense of danger had allowed him to escape a disaster. Where his body had originally been, the sharp tip of a sword had silently pierced through the wooden pillar. Because the wooden pillar was too big, the tip of the sword only extended a little. It was cute and full of killing intent, and it told Fan Xian that if he had not twisted earlier, the tip of the sword would have been in his waist. Fan Xian coldly circled around the long pillar, and like a mudfish, he accurately locked his hand forward and grabbed the middle-aged serving girl's left forearm. His reaction was different from that of a normal fighter, and he did not care about the other party's movement to draw the sword. The effect was very good. The serving girl's sneak attack had failed, and she was afraid that the assassin would stop her from drawing the sword, so she concentrated all her jinqi on her right arm, and the defense of her left arm was much weaker. With the sound of a piece of paper being torn apart, the serving girl drew the sword from the wooden pillar and opened her mouth to scream. Fan Xian's eyebrows relaxed, and the tyrannical jinqi in his body poured into the other party's left arm with great vigor. This palace maid had the strength of level 7, but she had never encountered the strange, genuine qi in an assassin's body. She felt a stabbing pain in her meridians, as if countless knives were scraping the tender walls of her meridians. This kind of pain made the palace maid's chest tighten, and she actually swallowed the warning sound, making a strange, soft sound in her throat. Fan Xian recognized at a glance that this serving girl was the one who had welcomed him into Guangxin Palace. Her eyebrows were extremely long, and her appearance was very special. The serving girl's eyebrows trembled, and she circulated the jinqi in her body, wanting to fight him head-on. She did not know that the hand holding her arm would suddenly lose its jinqi, and all the jinqi she had circulated around her body would fall into thin air. In a daze, she felt very uncomfortable. Because of this sudden imbalance, the right side of her body seemed to be slightly sluggish. In this split second, the right side of her neck went slightly numb, and then she immediately felt her entire body become slightly stiff. Fan Xian frowned, and his 2 fingers retracted from her neck. He knew that the poison on the needle could not truly seal the throat with blood. He immediately flipped his right palm over and pressed it against the serving girl's abdomen, where the ribs connected. With a muffled sound, the serving girl's chest caved in, and blood flowed from all her orifices. She died. Chapter 140. He didn't know if the young serving girl had gone to report, or if it was a trap set up by the serving girl who had died by his hand. But Fan Xian knew that although he hadn't let the serving girl make a sound during the fight, the true masters of the palace must have been alerted. So he didn't care about the corpse on the ground. The tip of his foot touched the stone floor, and his whole body turned into a sharp arrow, flying in the direction of the palace wall he had planned. The palace wall was still as high as ever. Fan Xian was a little annoyed at his own speed. When he finally reached the top of the wall, he heard a buzzing sound behind him, as if the air behind him had begun to tremble. He turned his head in shock and saw a general on the corner tower of the palace far away, looking at him with a bow drawn. In the night sky, an arrow flew toward his face like a soul-devouring divine object. A breath ago, the arrow was on the horizon. A breath later, the arrow was in front of him. The arrow seemed to have a ruthless spirit on it, insufferably arrogant. Fan Xian let out a wild roar. The black cloth on his face was shaken to pieces by this roar. The nameless tyrannical jinqi that he had quietly cultivated in his body for 16 years, in this moment of life and death, wildly and ruthlessly poured into his hands. His fists met in the air, and just so happened to hit the shaft of the arrow. In a moment, the violent jinqi in his fists collided with the powerful force of the arrow. The shaft of the arrow had already been smashed into powder, and the arrowhead narrowly brushed past Fan Xian's hair, piercing the night sky far away. A loud noise rang through the night sky of the palace, startling those who were sleeping and waking them up. It was like a sudden clap of thunder on the palace wall. This arrow was too powerful. It didn't seem like something a mortal could shoot. After blocking it with his fists, the Jinshi in Fan Xian's body was depleted. He fell down the palace wall, dispiritedly and powerlessly. His black clothes fluttered in the night wind. He looked very wretched. Far away on the corner tower of the palace wall, Yan Xiaoi, the commander of the royal palace, watched the assassin fall down the palace wall. Her eyes narrowed, revealing a very valiant expression. She said coldly, "He's not dead. Go catch him." Yes. The subordinate guard received the order and left. Under the palace wall, Fan Xian, dressed in black, fell. Just as he was about to hit the ground, he forcefully twisted his body, one knee, one foot, and one hand on the ground. He crashed into the ground with a muffled thud. The powerful force made him spit out blood, wetting the remaining pieces of black cloth on his face. Immediately after, he gave a low roar and ran toward the forest outside the palace walls. In the instant before the guards at the corner of the city appeared, he disappeared into the darkness of Jingdou. The next day, in an inconspicuous small room at the foot of the imperial city, old eunuch Hong didn't seem to be in good spirits. He sat on the main seat with his eyes half closed. The two generals were also resting with their eyes closed. It seemed that no one was willing to speak. After a long time, Deputy Commander Gong Dian, who had been resting at home the night before, said softly, "His Majesty is shocked." The commander of the imperial palace, Yan Xiaoi, who had shot Fan Xian off the wall with an arrow last night, now slowly opened his eyes. He said coldly, "One of the eldest princess's personal serving girls died. The eldest princess is very angry." After the two of them spoke, Eunuch Hong slowly opened his eyes. In a slightly aged voice, he said, "Yesterday, I fell for the trap of luring the tiger away from the mountain. The Empress Dowager is very unhappy." "Who is it?" Gong Dian asked matter-of-factly. In his heart, even if it was luring the tiger away, with Eunuch Hong, a peerless ace who still had the power of a tiger even in his illness, there was no chance of escape. "I don't know." Eunuch Hong smiled slightly. The level he displayed was only above the 9th level, but he was very familiar with the buildings of Jingdou, especially in the dark. "I was led around Jingdou a whole time, but in the end, I still lost him. This person is very impressive." For Eunuch Hong to say that someone was impressive, that person must truly be impressive. Yan Xiaoi was 35 years old and was at the peak of his mental state. As the commander of the guards in the palace, he was responsible for the safety of the entire royal palace. He looked coldly at Eunuch Hong and said, "Where did you follow him to in the end?" "In an alley not far from the Dongyi diplomatic mission," Gong Dian said. "The results of today's investigation are out." Eunuch Hong's chopsticks pierced through the clothes of the first assassin. After the Overwatch Council compared them, they confirmed that they came from Tianxiang satin. Yan Xiaoi closed his eyes to rest. Gong Dian continued. The Overwatch Council found out that some time ago, the Dongyi diplomatic mission had ordered a batch of clothes from Tianxiang. They did not use the name of the diplomatic mission, but had someone else help them. Eunuch Hong quietly asked, "What are you trying to say, Deputy Commander?" Gong Dian smiled. Why would they use someone else's name to order clothes? Clearly, they were worried that we would catch some small trace. Looking at all the clues, the first assassin should have been someone from Dongyi. The only one who could be above the 9th level is Sigu Sword's first disciple, Yun Jilan, who has been quiet in the capital these days. Yan Xiaoi suddenly opened his eyes. It wasn't Yun Jilan. If someone from Dongyi wanted to sneak into the palace, why would he need to buy new clothes? He could just knock out a random person on the street and strip them. Yun Jilan is a straightforward person. Eunuch Hong nodded. Although that 9th level person hid his sword will, he still walked the path of Sigu's sword. So I'm very interested. If it wasn't Yun Jilan, could it be that someone from Dongyi came and dared to disobey Yun Jilan's orders? The possibility of framing someone is very high. Gong Dian listened to the two of them and frowned. It's too much of a coincidence. So it could be that someone framed Yun Jilan. How many people in Dongyi could inherit Sigu Sword's legacy? Including Yin Jilan, there are 3 ninth-level people. Then the other 2 are suspects. Let's talk about the night traveler who was shot down by the commander. I heard that the power of the commander's arrow shook the entire palace. Unfortunately, it didn't kill him. From the tone of his voice, it seemed that Eunuch Hong and this commander did not get along very well. Yin Xiaoyi looked down on this eunuch, but he knew that he was the most powerful person in the imperial palace. He snorted coldly and said, "The second assassin was also a 9th-level figure. Although he was only below the 9th level, if I could kill him with 1 arrow, wouldn't I become one of the 4 grandmasters?" Another 9th level. Gong Jian was full of shock. He himself had been hovering above the 8th level all his life, unable to advance even an inch. When he heard that 2 9th-level aces had sneaked into the palace last night, he could not help but feel many complicated emotions. There are only 7 9th-level masters in the entire kingdom of Qing, and only 4 in the capital. How could there be so many 9th-level masters in the world? Eunuch Hong said lightly. Clearly, he didn't believe Commander Yan's judgment. He thought that Yin Xiaoyi was trying to shirk his responsibility. Gong Dian was always afraid of this kind of situation. He quickly said, "His Majesty has ordered us to close this case within 10 days. I will immediately send people from the Overwatch Council to investigate the situation in each palace. First, we must determine why they would take such a big risk to sneak into the palace." Yin Xiaoyi shook his head. "I don't know why the second person did it, but the first person must have something to do with Dongyi. So we must start with the Dongyi diplomatic mission and find out why the clothes were ordered. It would be best if we could find out where each piece of clothing went." As they were preparing to investigate, a young eunuch suddenly rushed in and announced the emperor's decree. Last night's incident was to be investigated by Yi Zhong, the commander of the capital garrison. The palace guards were to act as usual, and no one was to announce it. After the eunuch left, the 3 palace guards in the room looked at each other. Yin Xiaoyi slowly closed his eyes. He knew that His Majesty was beginning to suspect one of them. Eunuch Hong walked out with his hands behind his back, his face calm. A few days later, the capital searched for the assassin, but found nothing. His Majesty's decree actually helped Fan Xian, the true person who entered the palace. In this plan, there were not many mistakes in any aspect, but forcing Wu Zhu to wear the new brown clothes was a bit presumptuous and gave the game away. Fan Xian secretly found out that Dongyi had ordered the clothes from Tianxiang satin because the son of the master of Dongyi liked the traditional style of clothes in the capital, so he ordered a batch. As for why the order had been made under a secret name, it was actually for a very simple reason. The young master of Dongyi, a place where all the merchants and merchants met, actually admired the clothing of the southern barbarians of Qing. If this news got out, he would probably be cursed to death by the merchants of Dongyi, who had always been very bold. Of course, Fan Xian had used this trick mainly because he didn't believe that Wu Zhu could perfectly imitate Siga Jian's sword will. If he had known earlier that Wu Zhu was so powerful, Fan Xian would certainly have used a framing trick more perfectly. But the ending was not bad. At least the palace still suspected the other 2 9th-level aces of Dongyi. The Overwatch Council also began to investigate the day the enemy came from the palace and where the other 2 disciples of Siga Jian were. No one would think it was Fan Xian, because on the night the enemy came from the palace, all the high-ranking officials of the capital saw him drink thousands of cups of wine and write hundreds of poems in the Great Hall. Zhuang Mohan, the master of Northern Qi, was so angry that he vomited blood and wished that his hair could turn white overnight. In the end, he was completely drunk and collapsed at the feet of His Majesty. This was the error of human thinking. Not only did they think that a drunken Fan Xian could not get out of bed, but people were used to the fact that after a person did something shocking, they could not immediately do something else. After an orgasm, it was impossible to have another orgasm. There had to be a refractory period. Chapter 141. Fan Xian lay safely and comfortably on the bed. His face was pale, and he looked like a young man with a hangover. There was a copper basin next to the bed. It was very clean, because the vomit had long since been cleaned up. Ruo had already been driven to bed by him, and another servant girl was attending to him. Fan Xian's pale face was not faked, and his vomiting was not caused by medicine. The force on Yin Xiaoyi's arrow had truly injured his internal organs. His chest felt a wave of irritation. He would probably need a rest for a few days before he could recover. Thinking of that soul-devouring arrow, Fan Xian could not help but feel afraid. If he had not exploded with Jinshi at the moment of life and death, he feared that he really would have been killed by that arrow. It was hard to imagine that the arrow still had such power from so far away. It seemed that the commander was already at the upper 9th level and could step into the pinnacle of the human world at any time. Actually, when he had used both hands to smash the arrow, Fan Xian's hands had not been as fast as the arrow, so he had only smashed into the shaft. It was very dangerous, but fortunately, there were no wounds on his hands. Otherwise, if someone had seen it, he would not know how to explain it. At the time, he had taken a risk to go to Guangxin Palace to see if he could find anything. He also didn't want the people in the palace to think of the key in Hongguang Palace, because eunuch Hong had been lured away by Wu Zhu. That was the most important thing. His fingers gently rested on his waist, slowly stroking that hard thing. His heart was filled with happiness. His luck was really good, but would his luck really be good forever? He decided that he would never hide things in the secret compartment under his bed again, and he would never go to the palace to play again. In the few days that he had been pretending to be drunk, Fan Xian's immortal performance in the palace had long since spread throughout the capital. Countless scholars and nobles had come to visit, but Fan Jian had coldly blocked them outside, saying that his son had exhausted himself that day and needed to rest. But the level of the people who came was getting higher and higher. Even the descendants of some of the founding fathers and high-ranking military officers had come. Just as Fan Jian was having a headache, Fan Xian used the mouths of people in the manner to announce a decision that everyone was puzzled and regretful. Fan Xian would no longer write poetry. Many people thought that Master Fan was just spouting nonsense and did not take it seriously. Only Prince Jing's Run and Xian, who understood Fan Xian's temperament a little, knew that this matter was probably true. But in any case, it was still in the aftermath, so they could slowly discuss it later. The summer heat in the capital had gradually disappeared, and an autumn rain slowly floated down. In reality, there were only 3 days until he entered the palace, but Fan Xian felt that these 3 days were the longest of his 2 lives. The box was under his bed, and the key was in his hand. There was no greater temptation than this, but Fan Xian still endured it for 3 days. He was like a child who stole a snack from the kitchen that his mother did not allow him to eat, and then carefully hid it in the wardrobe. Then, knowing that the snack was there, he went to sleep, satisfied. Every day before he went to sleep, he glanced at the wardrobe, but he did not really want to eat it until the snack finally went bad. The box would not go bad, but Fan Xian still decided to eat it tonight. Outside the window, the autumn rain fell in a pitter-patter, landing in the backyard of Fan Manor and on the flowers and plants that were about to go through autumn frost. Fan Xian did not light a lamp inside the window. He knew that his eyes could see clearly in the dark. The box was placed on the table, and he steadily inserted the key into the brass keyhole. With a click, the plywood in front of the box sprang open, revealing a small blackboard. There were some strange little squares on the board. With a light press, the squares would sink down. Each square had a unique pattern, and no one in this world could recognize these patterns. Fan Xian smiled, but this smile was a little bitter, a little understanding, and a little consolation that had finally been confirmed after a long time of guessing. He closed his eyes and couldn't help but laugh again. He felt that this world was really too crazy. So, with trembling fingers, he lit a pot of the good local tobacco that Tang Zijing had given him to calm his mood. This was the first time he had smoked in the world of the kingdom of Qing. The smell of smoke was very good. White smoke rose in spirals in the dark room, and the autumn rain slowly fell in the lonely courtyard. Fan Xian felt that he would never be lonely again. The people of this world would not know what these little black squares were, nor would they know what the strange patterns on the squares were. But Fan Xian knew, because after the lock on the box was opened, what was revealed was a keyboard. It was a very familiar keyboard from his previous life. The strange patterns on it were actually 26 English letters, as well as the numeric keys and the F5 that Fan Xian was most familiar with. After seeing this, the matter that Fan Xian had secretly guessed for a long time had finally been confirmed. The mother of his physical body, the woman called Yi Qingmei, had come from the same place as him. At this moment, he did not think of the Tian Mai being mentioned in the conversation between Zhuang Mohan and the eldest princess in Guangxin Palace. The dimly lit tobacco pot flickered in the dark room. Fan Xian's face had already recovered its calm. His hands gently placed on the keyboard, and he began to guess what the password was. It's the name. Wu Zhu, who had come to his side at some point, stood in the corner of the room. Although his eyes were covered by a black cloth, his face, facing the box, revealed an emotion that people would call sorrow. I only remember the name. The lady said there were only 5 strokes. Fan Xian nodded calmly and began to type. After all, it had been 16 years since he had come into contact with this kind of thing. At first, it felt strange, but after many tries, that familiar feeling returned to his body and his hands. His fingers danced across the keyboard. But after many tries, he suddenly smiled bitterly and raised his head. There is no name in this world that requires only 5 strokes. As soon as he said this, he knew what the problem was. He took 2 more puffs of his tobacco, looked at the box in front of him, and shook his head. He sighed. Mother, you really are messing around. But the problem is, did you teach Wu Zhu the 5 strokes before? The 5 strokes were not 5 strokes, but a 5-stroke input method. Full canned. Fan Xian entered the first name, Yi Qingmei. There was no response. He entered the 5 strokes of his own name with some uncertainty. Ibusi. There was still no response from the box. He smiled bitterly, thinking that his name had been chosen many years later. How could Yi Qingmei have known? Suddenly, he had a thought. He looked at Wu Zhu, who was in the corner of the room, with a faint smile. Wu Zhu seemed to feel his strange gaze. He tilted his head slightly. What are you doing? Fan Xian did not answer him. Instead, he entered Wu Zhu's name. G-G-G-H. The box made a soft sound, and then opened. Fan Xian looked at Wu Zhu again and smiled. Uncle, I now suspect that there is some indecent secret between you and Mother. Fan Xian had brought the box from Danzhou to the capital. Of course, he knew the weight of the box, so he was not worried that there was a hydrogen bomb hidden inside. But when he saw the contents of the box, he could not help but shake his head as he walked out of the room and foolishly into the rainy night. He thought to himself that his mother really did not have much creativity. The box was divided into 3 layers. Due to its limited shape, the items that could be placed in each layer had to be long and narrow. The first layer had metal tools that were divided into 3 parts. Some were tubular, and some seemed to be suitable for holding. Fan Xian furrowed his brows as he looked at the metal tubes. Although he was also from Earth, he did not immediately understand what they were. It was not until he stuck his finger into one of the metal tubes that he began to understand. He raised a part of it to his eyes and looked at it carefully. He found that there was a line of letters, M82A1. Mother, father. Fan Xian's finger trembled slightly. Although he was not a military enthusiast in his previous life, he knew what this line of letters represented. This was a sniper rifle. This was the best sniper rifle in that world. If it was equipped with armor-piercing bullets, it could pierce through a thick wall from a kilometer away. Fan Xian's right hand grabbed the barrel of the gun. His hand could not help but tremble. He understood that in a society like the Kingdom of Qing, which was still in the age of cold weapons, if he had a sniper rifle in his hand, it would mean something. It meant that from now on, he would have the ability to kill anyone from a few kilometers away without fear of being discovered. It meant that regardless of whether it was the commander who had shocked the heavens with his arrow or Yun Zhilan from the Dongni diplomatic mission, as long as he wanted to, he could kill them countless times over. But he did not know if it would be effective against the Grandmaster. Fan Xian nervously placed the 3 parts of the sniper rifle on the table. He had long since put the smoking pot to one side. He placed both hands on the table and took a few deep breaths to calm himself down. It seemed that he already had all the necessary requirements to become a demon of the night. Of course, The prerequisite was that he had bullets. Fan Xian looked at the second layer, dumbfounded. Aside from a letter, there was nothing else. There were no more than 10 bullets, as he had expected. Without bullets, this sniper rifle was no better than a fire stick. Chapter 142. Where are the bullets? Fan Xian was like a girl who woke up from a sweet dream to find herself sleeping on the firewood in the kitchen. He lowered his voice and asked Wu Zhu angrily. Wu Zhu's answer was honest, but it sounded clever to others. What are bullets? Fan Xian was annoyed. He could only describe to Wu Zhu the shape of a bullet, its size, length, and how to use it. Full of anticipation, he asked, "Did you see my mother use this thing before?" Wu Zhu shook his head. "I told you, I forgot some things." Just as Fan Xian was feeling slightly disappointed, Wu Zhu suddenly opened his mouth and said, "However, I remember that the things you mentioned seemed to have no use back then, so when I carried you away, I threw them all in the cellar of Taiping Courtyard." Fan Xian's temperament had long been trained to be very calm, but hearing this, he couldn't help but want to hug this cute blind man and give him a big kiss. There was a letter in the second compartment of the box. The box was well sealed, so when Fan Xian lightly flicked the letter, no dust fell. To Wu Zhu, Fan Xian didn't know what to feel. So this box wasn't for him, but for the person next to him. He forced a smile and handed the letter to Wu Zhu, as if forgetting that he was blind. Wu Zhu didn't take it. "The lady let me see it," he said coldly. "For you to hear. Just read it." Fan Xian smiled, tore open the letter, and began to read. After reading a few lines, he couldn't help but smile. He had thought that the box contained the will of the divine weapon. It was a very uncreative thing, and he couldn't help but look down on his mother's methods. But after reading this letter, he realized that the woman called Yi Qingmei really did look down on all the men in the world. The handwriting wasn't elegant, and it was much worse than Ruoruo's. It even seemed a little rough and sloppy, and the tone of the letter was also very strange. Moreover, the words inside didn't connect. It seemed that they hadn't been written at the same time. "Cute little Zhu, give me a kiss. I really like you. I've wanted to introduce you to a wife many times, but you've always been cold. And be gentle. I'm really angry. If you go to that temple to fight, I guess you still won't be able to win and will have to run back like a dog. So I wrote something to make fun of you." Seeing this, Fan Xian couldn't help but glance at Wu Zhu. How could such a handsome grandmaster look like a dog? The letter continued. "What about me? When you left, I drugged someone with an aphrodisiac and succeeded in borrowing his seed. I just don't know if it will be a precious daughter or a bastard son. This box is the only thing I've left in this world." Old Mao said that in this life, he had only affected the area around Beijing. Remember, I also said that when I came to this world, I only left behind this box. Seeing the words borrow seed and bastard of a son, Fan Xian almost fell off the stool. It turned out that not only was his life strange, but it was also quite romantic. It was a pity that the letter did not clearly state who he had borrowed the seed from. This was the biggest question in Fan Xian's heart. The following were the original words of Fan Xian's mother, Yi Qingmei, who had once shocked the world. "It's sad, isn't it? Other than you, there's probably no one else in this world who can open this box. Who told me to be so gentle and kind as to teach you the 5 strokes that are useless in this world? Cute little Zhu doll, I really want to hug you to sleep. Come back quickly. I'll put the box back in its old place. You should know where it is. Hey, if you open the box and see this letter, then of course you know where it is. I seem to have said some nonsense again. I'm just curious now. Will I have a daughter or a son? If it's a daughter, that's good. If it's a son, it'll be his father's turn to worry. And men are too ambitious. Who knows what they'll do? Okay. I admit that I'm ambitious, but I want to make this world a better place. Should this little girl's beautiful wish be described as ambition? Why do I feel like I'm writing my last words? Damn it. Baba, that's too unlucky. Who knows? Let's just say it's my last words. I've already written it down. Remember, don't use this broken spear. There's no strength in chopping ants with a broadsword. After reading this letter, destroy this box. Don't let those random people in this world know of my glorious life. They don't deserve it. I've been here, seen it, played it. I've been the richest man. I've killed princes. I've plucked the beard of an old emperor. I've used the sunshine of this world to shine. I've almost unified the world. But I just don't care. How about it? My precious daughter and bastard son. I don't think they can do as much as I can. Just live on in peace. Sigh, when I die of old age, will I be able to return to that world? Father, mother, I miss you very much. Little Juju, you don't understand what I'm saying. You don't know where I came from. I'm very lonely. People come and go in this world, but I'm still lonely. I'm very lonely. I'm very lonely. After reading the letter, Fan Xian was silent for a long time. Then he smiled and asked softly, I'm not from this world. Do you remember? Wu Zhu opened his mouth slowly. I think I remember a little. Mother said that you went to fight with the people of the temple. Did that fight make you lose part of your memory? Fan Xian's hand slowly slid along the edge of the box. I think so. If you didn't lose that part of your memory, you should be the one to open this box. After you open it, will you tell me everything? I don't think so. Fan Xian nodded. I thought so too. Maybe you'll find a small mountain village that no one knows about and grow up with me. A smile appeared on his face. Maybe that's not a bad life. He then sighed and shook his head helplessly. It's a pity that you can't start over. Why aren't you curious that I can open this box? Fan Xian teased Wu Zhu. He wanted to see the shocked expression on Wu Zhu's face when he found out that he was also a soul from another world. Why should I be curious? Wu Zhu was still very calm. He suddenly felt that the young master was just like the young lady. They were both very long-winded and boring humans. Fan Xian felt like an idiot. Does her death have anything to do with the temple? He asked. I don't know. Fan Xian was silent for a while, then continued to look at the box. There was a piece of paper stuck to the last layer of the box. He measured the difference in height between the inside and the outside. This layer should be very thin. He peeled off the paper and looked at it. He was stunned. On the paper was written, Hey, if it was Wu Zhu, after seeing that letter, you should immediately destroy this box. You actually want to keep looking? Tell me the truth. Who are you? How did you open this box? His mother really was a person with a heart of crystal. Fan Xian was lost for a moment. He replied in a daze, I am your son. Of course, she couldn't hear this answer. The paper was very short. There weren't many words on it. At the end, there was only a warning. If it's not my daughter, then it's my son. You can look at what's below when you've killed someone. Remember, looking at the exaggerated exclamation mark and the empty circle below it, Fan Xian didn't dare disobey his mother's last words. He obediently stuck the paper back on the box. I'm going out for a walk. Fan Xian said this to Wu Zhu, then left the room. With his head down, he walked into the early autumn rain. The box was with Wu Zhu, so it couldn't be safer. He wasn't worried. After Fan Xian's somewhat dispirited silhouette disappeared into the rain, Wu Zhu slowly walked out from the corner and sat down at the table. His fingers stroked the box and the gun on the table, then fell on the letter. His fingers lightly moved back and forth on the envelope. It was unclear what he was thinking. A slight rustling sound rang out between his fingers and the letter. The rustling sound rang out between the rain and the grass in the courtyard. The room was pitch black. Wu Zhu sat alone next to a box. The black cloth on his face softened, and a very gentle expression appeared on his face. Fan Xian walked alone on the street in the rainy night, letting the rain wash over his face and soak his body. A glimmer of a smile occasionally appeared on his face. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a faint sorrow. A moment later, it was calm again. Who knew how many emotions were fermenting in his heart, interweaving and colliding? Yi Qingmei, that dazzling name, seemed to have only truly entered his life and entered his mind today. He now understood many things. He knew where his mother came from and what she had done in this world. His grandmother in Danzhou had said that before his father ascended the throne, the two princes were the most likely to inherit the throne of the Qin kingdom. The two princes, on the other hand, died in a ridiculous murder case. After reading the letter, Fan Xian naturally knew that the two princes who were always on guard against assassinations, had died under his mother's sniper rifle. In other words, the present royal family of the Qing kingdom was completely dependent on his mother to be able to have this world. His mother had built Qingyu Hall and established the Overwatch Council. She had provided the most basic of everything for the country to become powerful. It could even be said that without Yi Qingmei, there would be no present Qing kingdom. Chapter 143. Fan Xian walked on the street without feeling anything. The rain soaked into his clothes, making them cold and wet, but his heart was still burning. He looked at the streets of Jingdou again. The four-wheeled carriages walking on the streets, the glass windows of the rich families by the street, the kaleidoscopes he had seen before, and the slippery soaps, all of these things connected with him in an instant. It was as if all of these things were imprinted with his mother's aura. This street, this house, this world, everywhere had the scent of that woman. At the end of the letter, it said, "I am very lonely." Before today, Fan Xian had also been very lonely. From now on, he was no longer lonely. He laughed loudly in the rainy street. His laughter traveled far and woke up some of the pedestrians who had already taken advantage of the rainy night to sleep early. Someone cursed at him. He continued to smile. Yi Qingmei was definitely not the little girl she appeared to be in the letter. Fan Xian was certain of this. His mother had an incomparably strong heart. Only in this way could she have such a brilliant life in this completely unfamiliar world, borrowing the unfamiliar sunlight. In this familiar yet unfamiliar Qing kingdom, you have let down that woman called Yi Qingmei. The rain hit Fan Xian's face forcefully. Like a monster, he gradually became one with the pitch-black night. Perhaps this chest did not have any fundamental help to his life, but it gave him a feeling that he was not alone. It allowed him to walk more and more freely in this world and this rainy night. Fan Xian walked alone in the wind and rain, but he smiled. Since he was going to live a full life, he had to live it naturally. Just like he had said to his sister in the beginning, when they looked back on the past, don't always feel that the word sullen was written on your face. The autumn wind and rain worried people to death. Worry killed. The matter of entering the royal palace at night could not just end like this. The commander of the Jingdou garrison, Sir Yi Zhong, who had never formally appeared on the stage, began to investigate this matter after receiving the emperor's orders. Although his official position was the Jingdou garrison, in recent years, he had been leading Dingzhou to the west to protect Jingdou from afar. By the time he rushed back to Jingdou, 3 days had already passed. The discerning people in the palace knew why the emperor had chosen him. First, it was because the Yi family had received the emperor's favor and was loyal. The degree to which they were trusted by the emperor was only below that of Chen Pingping. As for Lord Chen Pingping, he naturally couldn't drag his crippled body to investigate such a trivial matter. Secondly, it was because the top 3 figures in the imperial guard system seemed to be under suspicion. Yi Zhong also knew that this matter was very complicated. The commander of the imperial guards, Yan Xiaoi, was discovered by the eldest princess many years ago. His martial prowess was known to be the best in the palace. The deputy commander, Gong Dian, was his junior disciple. As for that eunuch Hong, who never showed himself, forget it. Even Yi Zhong did not want to provoke him. Besides, Yi Chong did not suspect any of them. He was only curious about the second person who infiltrated the royal palace, and why he would kill the eldest princess personal made outside Guangxin Palace. The investigation was carried out in secret. Because the Overwatch Council had been exposed by the head spy of Northern Qi, which had angered His Majesty, they were powerless to cooperate, so it was difficult to make any substantial progress. Until one day, after carefully investigating a few palaces, Yi Zhong came to Hongguang Palace. Then he smelled a faint, strange fragrance and immediately thought of the old poison that had followed His Majesty in the army tent during the northern expedition. He then thought of what the guards had said. When the assassins attacked that night, Zhuang Mohan of Northern Qi was also in Guangxin Palace. Yi Zhong, who understood the cruelty of the palace struggles, thought of the matter in a very strange way. So he immediately entered the palace to ask for His Majesty's forgiveness and resignation. He prostrated himself on the ground, his face full of shame. Is it that you can't find out, or that you don't dare to investigate? His Majesty's face always had that smile that seemed to see through everything. The true officials would occasionally wonder if this was some kind of method to control his subordinates. But Yi Zhong knew the wisdom of the emperor he served, so he answered honestly, I can't find out, and I don't dare to investigate. It is not convenient for me to investigate the affairs of the royal family. Minister Yi, are you not afraid that I will reprimand you for being disloyal to your master, for failing to distinguish between public and private affairs, and for not cherishing your life? Yi Zhong did not dare to get up. He replied, I dare not guess your Majesty's intentions, but I am slow-witted and do not know where to start investigating. There is no need to investigate this matter. I know what I am doing. His Majesty's smile was a little cold, but Yi Zhong did not see it clearly from his kneeling position. On the other side, the real suspect, Fan Xian, was still hiding in his manner these days. The main reason was that after he became famous for his poems, going to Taichung Temple to drink tea, or going to Honglu Temple to watch from the sidelines had become a luxury. The negotiations were over, and Northern Qi's diplomatic mission had already left the capital, but Dongyi was still delayed for some time. When the news had truly died down, the Dongyi diplomatic mission left the capital with a lot of silver, somewhat unhappily. They did not know that the fact that the kingdom of Qing did not imprison them all after the night raid on the palace was already the result of His Majesty's magnanimity. Now, Fan Xian could truly be said to have shaken the capital. No one paid attention to the power behind him, but focused on him personally. After all, in this world, he was the only one who could make the great Zhuang Mohan vomit blood on the spot. Furthermore, he was so young. As if it had been discussed beforehand, the crown prince and the second prince increased their efforts to draw him to their side. Li Hongcheng often brought Ro Jia to the manor for tea, and Xai and Shaoqing also used the excuse of not seeing him for a long time to visit. But Fan Xian had many things to do, so for the time being he pushed both sides away. In the banquet plan, he had only completed 2 parts. The first was to successfully find the key, and the second was to almost successfully frame Dongyi's Yun Jilan, causing the court to increase their surveillance. This 9th-level ace was so badly battered that he could not even think of challenging Fan Xian to a duel until he left the capital, in order to ensure his own safety. He had found out that the eldest princess was colluding with Northern Qi, but he had been waiting for the right time to throw it into the pot. 2 days after the Dongyi diplomatic mission left the capital, Fan Xian knew that the time had come. Fan Xian could not use the secret agreement between the eldest princess and the young emperor of Northern Qi to beat someone up because there was no documentary evidence or witnesses. Fan Xian also did not dare to meet with the emperor. Although with his current reputation in the capital, it would not be difficult to meet with the emperor. But he had a very complicated conjecture about the emperor, and he could not guarantee that the emperor, in order to protect the royal family's reputation, would not kill him after finding out about the eldest princess's scandal. If it had been a normal citizen of the kingdom of Qing, after encountering such a situation, they could only hide the secret forever in their hearts, not daring to tell anyone for the rest of their lives, until they vomited blood and died. But not Fan Xian. He had the memories of 2 lives and the knowledge of 2 lives. He knew the importance of public opinion and its destructive power. He also knew that to deal with the crazy eldest princess, he had to use even crazier methods. After the banquet, Shishan Paper Workshop, which had a monopoly on the paper industry in the capital and the related industries of the palace treasury, still occasionally touched the business of Donbo Bookstore. But the eldest princess had no way to command the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, so she only did small things. And Fan Xian knew that this was the calm before the storm, and he decided to act first before the storm arrived. That night, Wu Zhu stood in a corner, listening to him speak. Ever since he had opened the chest, Wu Zhu had come to Fan Manor more often. It seemed that he was more worried about Fan Xian's safety. Fan Xian thought as he spoke, if you don't want to leave any traces, then you have to rob everything. Wu Zhu tilted his body to show that he understood. Fan Xian continued. These days, the ones who have been suppressing the business of Dongbao Bookstore are the Shishan Paper Workshop and Wansong Hall of the Palace Treasury. So we have to rob the Palace Treasury's paper and then use Wansong Hall's ink. But, Uncle, has anyone in this world ever seen the words you write? Wu Zhu said coldly. Don't worry. Fan Xian knew that his seemingly useless and absurd plan would certainly work. He smiled. Things like flyers don't need to be too big. He used his hands to measure the size. The key is to have a lot of copies. We have to put them up everywhere, especially in places like the Imperial College and the Imperial Library. We have to put up a few more copies. The students are young and hot-blooded, and are the easiest to provoke. And the scholars in the Imperial Library also like to play with their strength of character. After seeing the flyers, I think they'll be so angry they'll pull out their beards. Wu Zhu said coldly, the content. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows and sighed. I really am like an underground member of the party. He began to recite in detail how the flyers should be provocative. He had to give details that seemed both true and false, such as how the eldest princess had spoken to Zhuang Mohan, how Yin Bingyun had suffered in hiding in northern Qi, how he had been mercilessly abandoned by the nobles in the palace, how the eldest princess had harmed the interests of the court in order to seek her own interests, what benefits she had obtained, how many fake eunuchs she kept in the palace, how many old lovers she had outside. Wu Zhu calmly analyzed. No one would believe that the eldest princess would sacrifice so much just for some monetary gain. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows again. There aren't many people as smart as you in the world. As long as the people believe it, it's fine. As for the emperor, let's give him a reminder. Wu Zhu said coldly. The emperor doesn't need you to remind him. Chapter 144. Fan Xian smiled. If the eldest princess, who lived in the palace, was in contact with northern Qi, and the emperor, who had countless spies under his command, knew nothing about it, it would be inexcusable. He sighed. So I don't understand. Why did he let the eldest princess live in the palace and not go to his fief? The eldest princess is the Empress Dowager's most beloved daughter. She is his sister, and he has nothing to fear. How do you think the emperor will react after this? Fan Xian trusted Wu Zhu's analytical skills. Immediately mobilize the Overwatch Council to eliminate the influence you have single-handedly created. Reward the eldest princess generously to prove the unity of the royal family. After things have calmed down, find a suitable opportunity to have the eldest princess return to her fief, Xinyang. Wu Zhu said coldly. When rewarding the eldest princess, he will probably reward Princess Chun, and, at the same time, promote you. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. He knew that Wu Zhu was describing the possible truth, but it sounded like a cold joke. Why didn't the emperor think of using my simple method to force the eldest princess out of the palace? If what you say is true, he already knew about the eldest princess collusion with northern Qi. First of all, your method is perverted. Second, he doesn't need to force his own sister out of the palace. He likes to wait for those who are hiding below the surface to surface and then capture them all in one fell swoop. He is used to doing this sort of thing. Fan Xian could tell that Wu Zhu had great faith in the emperor's abilities. His brows furrowed even tighter. Although the royal family were all heartless bastards, when comparing the two, the emperor, whom he had met twice, was clearly gentler to him than the eldest princess. Thus, Fan Xian unconsciously began to worry about the rebellion that could happen in a few years. So by doing this, will we be able to alleviate the situation in the palace? The eldest princess should still have companions in the palace. I will investigate, Wu Zhu said coldly. Fan Xian thought for a moment, then decided to proceed with the plan. He smiled bitterly. I must find a way to get the eldest princess away from the palace for a while. Otherwise, before the emperor can capture them all in one fell swoop, I will become a ghost under their hands. The emperor has the courage and strength to wait for them to make the first move, but we do not. If a power that dared to collude with a foreign country fell into some kind of fanatical mood to deal with Fan Xian could only run behind Wu Zhu. Although traveling the world was Fan Xian's wish, he was not willing to pay the price of the moment. I'm going. Go. Fan Xian waved his right arm, feeling that he really did have the air of a young student leader. In his previous life, he had seen many films about the war of resistance against Japan. He felt that the kingdom of Qing, in the darkness of night, was very much like Beiping, which had been occupied by the Japanese. He and Wu Zhu were the brave students who fought against the invaders, carefully distributing leaflets in the darkness, calling on the people of the kingdom of Qing to rise up against their shameless rulers. He smiled and lay back on the bed. The box was just sitting there under the bed. He was not worried at all. After Wu Zhu lost his memory in this aspect, he was the only one in this world who knew how to open the box. After falling into a deep sleep, he had an incomparably sweet dream. In the early autumn, there was a great snowfall in the capital. The eldest princess shyly boarded the carriage and resentfully turned her head to look at the imperial city before leaving the world she lived in. In the beginning of autumn, in September, there really was a heavy snowfall in Jingdou. The white flyers that filled the sky were like snowflakes, falling everywhere in Jingdou, especially near the Imperial College and the Imperial Library. At that time, the sky was just beginning to brighten. The students and commoners who had just woken up in the morning picked up these unfamiliar pieces of paper. This was the first time in the land of the Kingdom of Qing that a flyer battle had occurred. But Fan Xian had still overestimated the passion of the people of the Kingdom of Qing and underestimated the ability of the Overwatch Council and the 6 ministries to control the situation. In just 4 hours, all of the flyers in the capital had been collected into the Fang Yamen by Tianhe Road. Not a single person dared to leave a flyer behind. Although the commoners rarely had any dealings with the Overwatch Council, they were afraid of the council's fierce reputation, and no one was willing to gamble with their lives. The Imperial College reacted quickly. That day, they requested an edict to begin the autumn examinations early. Within half a day, all sorts of measures were taken, and the situation was finally under control. But rumors did not need wings to fly, nor did they need air to breathe. They had long since spread through the streets and alleys of Jingdou. When people went out, they would often look at each other. The look in their eyes no longer said, "Have you eaten?" but rather, "Have you seen it?" The reputation of the eldest princess in the capital of the Kingdom of Qing had never been good. After all, she was in her 30s and still unmarried. This in itself was quite strange. So although the commoners did not completely believe the accusations on the flyer about the eldest princess' illicit relations with a foreign country, they still thought it was groundless and not without reason. The logic of the neighbors and aunties was even simpler. If she was so old and still unmarried, she was definitely not a good woman. This was the first time the royal family of the Kingdom of Qing had faced such a situation, and they could not help but feel nervous. Although the Overwatch Council's measures were effective, the palace was still in a state of panic. The palace maids and eunuchs deliberately lowered their voices as they walked. It was said that the emperor had lost his temper in the royal study, and the empress dowager had gone to Guangxin Palace. After a few slaps, the eldest princess had cried for a long time. Inside the Overwatch Council's room, there was an awkward silence. The heads of the 8 bureaus were all looking up. Qin Pingping sat in his wheelchair, pulling at the few strands of beard on his chin. He looked at the flyer and laughed strangely. Sir Qin could laugh, but the heads below him did not dare to laugh. Everyone knew what was written on that flyer. Tell me, how much of what is written on this paper is true? Qin Pingping finally suppressed the joy in his heart and looked at his subordinates. The first to bear the brunt was, of course, the head of the 8th Bureau. All of the literary products in the capital were now under the control of him and the related departments of the Ministry of Education. Such a big event had happened in the capital today, and he had long been scared out of his wits. Without answering the director's question, he rushed to report first. The paper is from Shishan Paper Workshop, which is under the control of the palace treasury. The ink is from Wansong Hall. That family has no background. Qin Pingping frowned and looked at him. I only asked if it was true, he reprimanded. I didn't ask you who wrote it. The head of the 8th Bureau wiped the sweat from his forehead and carefully replied, slandering the princess, talking nonsense about national affairs, and stirring up trouble. Naturally, none of it is true. Qin Pingping smiled, but it was a cold smile. The window was still blocked by the black cloth, so the part of his wheelchair looked cold. Is it all fake? The flyer said that the eldest princess had a secret agreement with Northern Qi to hand over Yin Bingyun, the head spy of the Qing kingdom in Northern Qi, to them. Yin Ruahai, the head of the 4th Bureau, frowned. The matter of Yin Bingyun must have been leaked by someone in the court, and it must be of a very high rank. But if it was the eldest princess, I really do not understand how this would benefit her. This flyer says that a few nights ago, Zhuang Mohan and the eldest princess met privately in Guangxin Palace, Qin Pingping said, feigning carelessness. Yin Ruahai shook his head. Master Zhuang was invited to live in the palace by the Empress Dowager. This cannot be used as evidence. Qin Pingping looked at him with admiration. Bingyun was imprisoned in the north, and yet you can still calmly analyze the situation. Not bad. He suddenly said in a low voice, but... Chapter 145. Qin Pingping looked at him without a trace of pity. You have followed me for 12 years. Before you die, I will give you a chance to say one last thing. The head of the 1st Bureau paled slightly, but quickly recovered his calm smile. Looking at the man who had promoted him from an ordinary worker to the 3rd most important person in the Overwatch Council, he said sincerely, do not trust women. They're all crazy, and they're not suited for politics. Having said this, he slapped the top of his head. With a crack, his body went limp, and he collapsed onto the wooden table, no longer breathing. These were his heartfelt words. Even if the conversation between the eldest princess and Zhuang Mohan had not been overheard by Fan Xian, Qin Pingping's expression showed that the eldest princess had long been the focus of the council's attention. From a moment the eldest princess madly betrayed Yin Bingyun, Zhu Gu, the head of the 1st Bureau, was destined to die. The corpse was dragged out. Naturally, there were rules to deal with the aftermath. Qin Pingping looked at the paper in front of him again and shook his head. Continue the analysis. Who would be so crazy as to reveal everything? He could be as calm as an ancient well, but when the other 7 heads saw a colleague they had worked with for more than a decade meet such a tragic end, they could not help but feel a little emotional. After a moment, they recovered and said the Dongi diplomatic mission was the last to leave the day before yesterday, and today this happened. I think Dongi has something to do with it. That's right. According to the results of the palace's investigation, the assassin who entered the palace on the night His Majesty invited the envoys of both countries to a banquet must have something to do with Dongi. It was also that night that the assassin appeared in Guangxin Palace and killed one of the eldest princess serving girls. It was probably at that time that he overheard the conversation between the eldest princess and Zhuang Mohan. The reason Dongi is releasing this information now is that they hope the court will be thrown into chaos for a while. After all, this time, the 2 countries did not reach an agreement with Northern Qi, so Dongi is afraid that the court will send out troops. And if this matter is exposed, His Majesty will be shocked, and the agreement with Northern Qi will probably be torn apart. The 2 countries will go to war again, and Dongi, who has always been caught between the cracks, will probably be happy to see that happen. Regardless of whether it is in terms of motive or final effect, Dongi is the most likely to act. It is also the target that could benefit the most from this matter. The only question is, how could Dongi write so many copies in one night for the papers that the Shishan Paper Workshop just lost last night? You have to know that most of their people hidden in the capital are being monitored by us. There shouldn't be that many people who are not under our control. Yin Ruahai analyzed, to do this in one night, they would need at least 40 well-trained people. Qin Pingping listened to his subordinate's methodical analysis and smiled without saying anything. The room suddenly became quiet. After a while, someone suddenly asked, "What about the exchange agreement?" "Continue," Qin Pingping said calmly. "In order to capture Xiao En, you destroyed a pair of legs. Now, because the eldest princess sold him out, you want Xiao En to be released. I cannot accept this." Unwilling? Do you have any way to bring Yin Bingyan back alive? Qin Pingping laughed coldly. The exchange must be made. We will deliver Xiao In alive into the hands of Northern Qi, but we can only let him see the sky of Northern Qi Shangjing. Everyone knew that the director had a plan. They nodded slightly. No matter what, these people did not want Xiao In to be returned to Northern Qi. That old man had been the head spy of Northern Wei, and who knew how many Qing spies he had killed. Furthermore, the information in his mind, even to this day, posed a great threat to the kingdom of Qing. If it weren't for the fact that the person captured by Northern Qi was the son of the 4th Bureau's Yan Ruohai, these ruthless spies of the kingdom of Qing would certainly have written to the director to persuade His Majesty to let the unfortunate man captured by Northern Qi sacrifice himself for the country. Yan Ruohai also knew this, and so he was extremely grateful to the director. Suddenly, he asked, "What about the eldest princess? We are loyal to His Majesty. We do not know what His Majesty has not said. We will not do it." Qin Pingping made his final decision. Should we capture the Dongi diplomatic mission? What for? Admit that the royal court has lost face? Let the 8th Bureau handle this matter. Say that the remnants of Guyu in the south, unwilling to accept the fall of their country, spread rumors in the capital. They have all been captured. Take a few of them from prison and kill them in the market. Before you kill them, make sure that all the people of the capital come to see the spectacle, Qin Pingping said lightly. The subordinates took their orders and left, disinfecting, spreading rumors, and arresting people. Only Yin Ruohai stayed until the end. He looked at the director and said calmly, "There is no poison in this world that can keep Xiao In alive and then kill him in front of the emperor of Northern Qi." "What do you mean?" Qin Pingping asked. Yin Ruohai frowned. "I know my son. He would not agree with His Majesty's methods. I think he would be happy to exchange Xiao's life." Qin Pingping looked at him coldly. "You must avoid arousing suspicion. Do not participate in the discussion. As for what to do, that is my business." "But you have disrupted His Majesty's rules, and His Majesty will not be happy." Whether it was the meticulous Qin Pingping or the sinister and crazy eldest princess, none of them could have imagined that such a big matter had been caused by a pair of master and servant. Fan Xian calmly, even coldly, watched the aftermath of this matter. It seemed that the erotic literature he had dictated was indeed an unbearable burden in this country. No matter what the emperor's true thoughts were deep in his heart, and he did not care how much damage the eldest princess's true power would suffer because of this. What he wanted had finally happened. Very quietly, the eldest princess moved out of the palace and returned to her own fief, Xinyang. As for what kind of conflict and power struggle there might be in the royal family, because of this matter, it was not within Fan Xian's scope of consideration. Just as Wu Zhu had calculated, before the eldest princess left the capital, His Majesty had indeed generously rewarded her. At the same time, Fan Xian had also received many benefits. Although on the surface there was no relationship, it seemed that His Majesty had only praised him for bringing honor to the country. Once the edict came down, Fan Xian immediately went from an 8th-level functionary to a 5th-level functionary of the Imperial College. In the Flower Hall, Fan Xian held the edict and scratched his head. He asked his father, "What does a functionary of the Imperial College do?" "Teach the students of the Imperial College." Fan Jian also felt that this edict was too strange. He shook his head. "You haven't even taken the official Imperial examinations. How can you be a functionary of the Imperial College? Does that mean I don't have to take the Imperial examinations next year?" Fan Xian asked with a smile. "Yes." Fan Jian seemed to be in low spirits. He said lightly, "Not taking the Imperial examinations is not the right path. Right now it looks very smooth, but in the future there will always be some obstacles." But then he thought about it again. Wasn't what he wanted for the Fan family to be safe, and for this beautiful young man in front of him to be able to live out the rest of his life in comfort? This was also that person's idea. Otherwise he would not have given the child the name Fan Xian. His courtesy name was Enji. Hearing that he didn't have to take the imperial examinations, Fan Xian was overjoyed. With a face full of smiles, he returned to the study. He saw that Fan Xizha had long been waiting in the room, grinding an ink stick and looking at him. "What are you doing?" "Inscribing." "What inscription?" "Bang Xian's Eye Poetry Collection." He said, "If the Imperial Library's revision doesn't work, you have to take it back. I'll revise it myself. I drank too much that day. Who knows what nonsense I spouted." He made up his mind. If he could fool them, then he would. If he really couldn't, then he could only endure the pain and use being drunk as an excuse to delete everything. After all, people who drank too much were prone to amnesia the next day. This is out of print. Fan Xizha shook his head. "I think in another 5 years, when you say that you don't want to write poems anymore, you can make a comeback in the poetry world. I think you'll earn a lot of money." Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. His gaze suddenly fell on a piece of pink paper in the corner of the study. He asked curiously, "What is that?" Fan Xizha said, "A gift list." Fan Xian was slightly startled. Only now did he remember that the day of his wedding was approaching. But with so many things that had happened recently, there was no need to hide it. His mood was slightly different from what it had been at the Temple of Qing. In the end, he and her mother could not coexist. Right now, the emperor could still control everything. When the time came, the eldest princess would certainly kill him. In other words, he would certainly kill the eldest princess. The wedding that he had been looking forward to for so long was gradually approaching, but Fan Xian felt a little uneasy and sad. A few days later, Donbua Bookstore's Bang Xian's Eye Poetry Anthology was finally published. This time, Donbua Bookstore had the right to print it, and Fan Xian personally made bold and decisive cuts. He thought he could relax a little, but unexpectedly, the bookstore held a ceremony. Using Fan Xian's name, they invited Crown Prince Jing, Vice Minister of the Office of the Grand Herald, Xian Chuwu, and the others. Fan Xian was shocked. Only his talented sister, Fan Ruo, was willing to show her face in public as a spokesperson, and they began to sell it in a lively manner. But he himself used the excuse that he wanted to maintain the mystery of a generation's immortal poet to hide in the royal courtyard and fall in love with Lin Wan-er. An 8th-level functionary spat out 100 poems on the spot, shocking the great Zhuang Mohan and causing him to vomit blood and flee. This story had long since spread throughout the kingdom of Qing. Although some of the poems had already spread to the common people, this poetry anthology was said to have been personally edited by the author, which was naturally very unusual. As expected, once the poetry anthology was published, paper was expensive in the capital, and Fan Xian's reputation immediately soared to another level. Last night, there was an autumn wind in the house. Fan Xian looked gently at his fiancée and smiled. "The method you suggested won't work." Lin Wan-er frowned and cutely pouted. "I haven't gone out for a few days." In fact, this young girl also knew about the recent events in the capital. Although she had grown up in the palace, the concubines all treated her as if she were in the palm of their hands. On one hand, she was weak and gentle and could not cause harm to those concubines. On the other hand, it was because His Majesty seemed to particularly love her. As for the eldest princess's words, she naturally did not see them, but she gradually heard some rumors. Later, before the eldest princess left the capital for Xinyang, she had once come to the courtyard. Mother and daughter were actually strangers, and after sitting across from each other for a while, the eldest princess got into her carriage and left the capital. Although Lin Wan did not know what connection Fan Xian had with her mother's departure, she was sensitive enough to feel that Fan Xian's mood was not as relaxed and happy as it had been in the past. So she suggested that they find another day to go out and enjoy the autumn scenery. The red leaves of the West Mountains of the capital were very famous. But hearing the two words West Mountains, Fan Xian thought of the paper mill that monopolized the capital's use of paper, and thought of the eldest princess behind the mill, who seemed to be looking at him gloomily and timidly. Fan Xian knew that the eldest princess's departure from the capital, the most fundamental power was still the emperor. His words only gave the emperor a reason to convince himself and the Empress Dowager. To explain here, the current Qing kingdom's court and commoners all called the flyers that fluttered like snowflakes that day words. This was because it was believed that when the people had no way to appeal, they would put forth their opinions. During this period of time, the capital had actually repeated this kind of words action a number of times, which made the Overwatch Council nervous for a while. Only after they had caught one of them did they find out that it was actually the hard laborers of the Taiyuan Road copper mine who had come to the capital to complain to the emperor. But they could not enter the attendance hall, so they had learned this method. The Overwatch Council went to the root of this, and in the end discovered that it was actually the West Mountain paper mill that provided these poor laborers with paper. But no matter how hard they tried, they could not dig out the person who had helped these laborers write their grievances. They only knew that the incomparably smooth handwriting came from the hands of a fortune teller next to the Temple of Qing. But when the Overwatch Council went to the Temple of Qing to search, they found that there was no fortune teller there at all, except for the high priest who seemed to have never left the temple in his life. The matter of the copper mine was naturally handled by the First Bureau. Very quickly, the officials of Taiyuan Road were arrested and brought back to the capital, where they would be executed in a month. But the court could no longer tolerate this kind of action and strengthen the control of paper. But Director Chun of the Overwatch Council did not punish the hard laborers of Copper Mountain. In the eyes of the officials, Director Chun seemed to have become much more soft-hearted. He came to his senses and looked at the slightly worried Warner. He smiled and walked up to her, gently stroking her smooth chin. He warmly said, "What are you thinking about? The eldest princess has returned to Xinjiang. If we have a chance after we get married, we will naturally have to visit." This was of course a lie. Fan Xian hoped that he would never go to Xinjiang, and hoped that the eldest princess would grow old and die in Xinjiang. Of course, he also knew that before he could truly shake the power of the eldest princess and her mysterious companion, the emperor liked to play tricks to lure the snake out of its hole. The eldest princess would one day return. Lin Wanner forced a smile and said, "See, I entered the palace yesterday. You know what has happened in the capital recently. The ladies are fine, but the Empress Dowager seems to be a little unwell. The emperor is not as friendly to me as he used to be." Fan Xian sighed in his heart, thinking that the emperor was having a headache over who the prince was in cahoots with her mother. How could he be the same as before? The two of them chatted for a bit. Suddenly, they heard what seemed to be the sound of a nanny coming up the stairs. Fan Xian reflexively leaped up and climbed onto the windowsill, preparing to jump out. Lin Wanner giggled and said, "Are you really used to it?" Fan Xian laughed with some embarrassment. Looking at Wanner's slightly pale face, his heart was filled with tenderness. He went forward and pulled her into his arms. In a low voice, he said, "Don't tire yourself out before the wedding. As for the illness and other things, don't be afraid. You have me. You have me in the future." The green tree branches outside the window stubbornly maintained their vibrant color in the autumn wind, trying to prove that no matter how bleak the outside environment was, it still had a yearning for beauty. At the corner of the stairs, the servant girl Siki saw the young master and the young lady in each other's arms. She couldn't help but stick out her tongue playfully. She thought to herself that the young master of the Fan family was a gifted scholar, but he was still so shameless. With the wedding at hand, the entire Fan manor began to move. The eldest princess was not in the capital, so the arrangements were made by imperial concubine Shu in secret. The entire Fan manor, besides feeling proud, became even more cautious. They were afraid that they would not be careful enough and would not conform to the rules. But the rules themselves were a very difficult thing to do. Lin Wanner's status as a princess only worked in the palace. In the outside world, she was still the illegitimate daughter of Prime Minister Lin, who had only been forced by the emperor at the beginning of the year to recognize her. So whether the wedding would be carried out in the style of a princess or a normal marriage between the children of ministers could not be confirmed. Lady Lu entered the palace again and finally received clear instructions from the Empress Dowager. Although the Empress Dowager did not like the Lin family participating in the marriage of her precious granddaughter, she still had to bow her head to the rules of the world. She acquiesced to the participation of the Lin family, and at the same time announced that the wedding would not be carried out in the style of a princess. Although the high-ranking aunts of the Fan family, who knew the inside story, were a little disappointed, they thought of the marriage with the Prime Minister's family, which was also something to be proud of. So they eagerly began to make preparations. But no one had expected that the splendor of Fan Xian and Lin Wanner's wedding would be more memorable than the wedding of the princess and the son-in-law for years to come. A series of firecrackers rang out. Fan Xian sat in the sedan chair, a little absent-minded. Smelling the faint, slightly burnt smell, he did not know why, but he remembered something from long ago. He shook his head and pulled his thoughts back. He forced a smile on his already stiff face and got out of the sedan chair. According to the rules, Fan Xian could not enter the house, and the Prime Minister could not go to Fan Manor today. Amidst the sound of firecrackers and flute music, the gate of Lin Manor gradually opened. The person who came out was Yuan Hongdao, the leading figure of Lin Manor. Today, this strategist had pinned a red flower on his hat, which made him look rather romantic. Master Fan. Yuan Hongdao greeted him with a face full of smiles. Fan Xian laughed bitterly in his heart. He silently cursed Yuan Hongdao for having the air of a second Yang, but he forced himself to look spirited. Mr. Yuan. The two of them had met a few times in the Prime Minister's manor and knew each other's identities. They were not strangers. Half of the experts in the capital who specialize in receiving the bride had been snatched up by Fan Manor. So as soon as Lin Manor opened its doors, the old women opened their mouths to say auspicious things. Yuan Hongdao was stunned by their words, and in a short while, the crowd rushed to the gate. Then they encountered a truly powerful resistance. As mentioned earlier, half of the experts in the capital had been snatched up by Fan Manor. Where's the other half? Of course, they had been snatched up by Lin Manor. So the two sides were spitting spittle. On the surface, they appeared to be celebrating, but in secret, they were swords without eyes. They boasted about themselves and belittled the other side. It sounded more like two extremely vulgar local tycoons getting married, rather than the Prime Minister's daughter marrying Count Sinan's son. Fan Xian laughed bitterly. He understood that this was a custom of the Kingdom of Qing. Before receiving the bride and groom would quarrel in front of Manor. It was said that after this ceremony, all future quarrels between the newlyweds would be over. Because it was a custom, it was rare for such matters to damage the harmony. But whichever side won the quarrel was the highlight of the show. Either the east wind prevailed over the west wind, or the west wind prevailed over the east wind. After all, even though the bride had to follow her husband, the bride's family still had to show their strength in advance to ensure the bride's status in the complicated life of the harem. In short, between the two families, the first thing to do was to rely on the women who spoke. Fan Xian stood there in a daze. He didn't know how long they had quarreled, but he finally realized that the noise had died down. Overjoyed, he opened his eyes and shouted, "Is it done?" After an awkward silence, someone said softly, "Master Fan, it's still early." The servant of the Lin Manor found a topic of conversation. He laughed and said, "It seems that the guest is in a hurry." "That's true, our young lady." He praised his young lady again. After some time, Yuan Hongdao noticed that Fan Xian's face was a little pale. He squeezed over and whispered, "Master Fan, please bear with it. The capital is not like Danzhou. There are more rules here." Fan Xian forced a smile and said, "I'm not in a hurry." He told himself in his heart, "I've endured for more than 30 years. Of course I'm not in a hurry." After a while, this vulgar ceremony finally ended. After a round of ceremonial music, the gate of the Lin Manor slowly opened for the second time. Two matrons led the way, and the bride, Miss Lin, finally walked out. Fan Xian's eyes brightened. Today, Wanner was dressed in bright red. Her sleeves were wide, and there was boundless joy in her beauty. However, the red scarf on her head covered the beaded crown on her head and the face that he could not forget. The people of Jingdo, who had been separated on the outside to watch the excitement, beat Fan Xian to it. Their eyes lit up and they cried out. Some young people even yelled for the bride to lift the red cloth on her head to let everyone see if the bride was pretty or not. If these young people had said such things under normal circumstances, not only would the Lin family have beaten them into a pulp, but the members of the Qinian unit, who had been scattered among the crowd and secretly watching everything, would certainly lock these little bastards who had insulted their future mistress in the Overwatch Council until they died of old age. But today was a joyous day, and the Emperor had to celebrate with the world when he married his wife. The Lin and Fan manners were no exception, and it was not good to ruin the atmosphere. However, Fan Xian was not in a good mood. He glanced at those people lightly, and his subordinates understood. Immediately, a few almost inaudible cries rang out from the crowd. Presumably, the most excited young people had been kicked in the foot. After another set of routine procedures, Lin Wanner, dressed in bright red, lightly moved her feet and climbed into the bridal sedan in front of her. During the whole process, Fan Xian was not able to say a word to her. He did not look her in the eye or touch her fingertips. By the time he returned to the Fan Manor, the guests had already arrived. The ceremonial music was playing, and it was very lively. The bride was first led into the inner room to sit, and the groom stood in front of the main hall to welcome the guests. Fan Xian's face was full of smiles as he talked to people he didn't know. In a low voice, he asked the person next to him, "When will the ceremony be held?" "It's still early, young master. After the same prison, the same table, and the same equipment, there is also the same—" Fan Xian did not hear the rest of the words. He just suppressed the urge to curse and told himself not to rush. He had said it before. He had already waited for more than 30 years. What was there to rush? Chapter 148. Fan Xian didn't remember what he had eaten for lunch. He only remembered that he had drunk a lot of wine and had been persuaded by officials with good intentions or greed to write 2 poems to describe the occasion. But no matter how much Fan Xian drank, he remembered his declaration to retire from the world of poetry. He smiled and declined each one. In the middle of the banquet, the people from King Jing's manor finally arrived. All the officials rose to greet them. Looking at the garden-like prince, Fan Xian smiled bitterly and wondered why he hadn't recognized him the first time he saw him. King Jing had always liked Fan Xian. Seeing him dressed so flashily today, he said in a muffled voice, "He doesn't know how to dress up." Fan Xian knew his personality. He smiled and said, "I wonder what His Highness was like during his wedding." Crown Prince Li Hongzhi lowered his voice. "Probably not as good as you." King Jing flew into a rage. "You weren't even born when I got married. What the hell do you know?" The officials watching the prince and the crown prince quarrel didn't dare say anything. They all hid to one side and snickered. Count Sinan, Fan Jian, was the host. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Your Highness, your words are unnecessary." Although he was a count, the 2 families had been friends for over 10 years, so he spoke casually to King Jing. King Jing waved his hand, no longer paying attention to the little ones. He followed Fan Jian into the inner hall. Halfway there, he stopped and turned to face Fan Xian. "You're not bad." Fan Xian was startled. He quickly bowed and thanked him. Imperial Prince Jing frowned again and said, "I was originally thinking that after 2 years, I would give Rugia to you. I didn't expect that my older sister would steal my son-in-law away from me." He seemed to really regret it as he shook his head and walked inside. Who was King Jing's sister? Naturally, it was Fan Xian's mother-in-law, the eldest princess. Fortunately, he had spoken in a low voice, so no one heard. But when Fan Xian heard that the prince was going to give Princess Rugia to him, he couldn't help but feel afraid. If he had to marry Rugia, it would be a terrible thing. Then he thought of his mother-in-law. She looked much younger than the prince, and he couldn't help but wonder. As his mind wandered, Li Hongchang patted him on the shoulder and said quietly, "Given our friendship, I should have come earlier." But you also know that it is not convenient for me to come too early on an occasion like this. Fan Xian understood that although Li Hongsheng had a good relationship with him, he was still crowned Prince Jing. There was no reason for him to rush to help the son of an official. That would be against the rules. He smiled and was about to say something when he heard Li Hongsheng say quietly, "Rojia did not come today. She asked me to tell you." Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. Eunuch Ho, who was familiar with the Fan family, pushed open the door with a smile and announced the edict from the palace. Today was a joyous day, and both Fan Jian and Fan Xian had guessed that the palace would have made arrangements, so they were not surprised. But the officials of the 6 ministries in the courtyard were surprised. Eunuch Ho's edict did not conform to the rules of the palace. The amount of gold and silk far exceeded the norm, and some items of tribute were also on the list. No matter how they looked at it, it did not seem like a reward for a minister's son's marriage. It seemed more like a marriage between a princess or a prince. Even if it was a marriage between the prime minister and Count Sinan, the royal family should not have paid so much attention. As Fan Xian listened to the edict, he whispered to his wife, who was under the red veil, "Do you understand? I am basking in your glory, husband." Lin Wanner was bashful under the red veil. After Eunuch Ho left, the officials let out a sigh of relief. Unexpectedly, they heard a shout from outside. The marriage between Fan and Lin is a match made in heaven. Imperial concubine Shu rewards them. Fan Xian was startled. He and Wanner bowed again. Imperial concubine Shu rewarded them with the original set of rare books. Imperial concubine Shu was the mother of the second prince. Unexpectedly, she was also acquainted with the Fan manor. The officials could not help but click their tongues in wonder. Unexpectedly, after a while, they heard another shout from outside. The marriage between Fan and Lin is a match made in heaven. Ning the Talented congratulates you. The officials were shocked again. Although this talented woman did not have a high status, her only son was the great prince. He had always led troops outside and was highly regarded by the emperor. Ning the Talented's gift was a sword, which suited her temperament of Dongyi origin. Fan Xian and Wanner had no choice but to bow again. Taking the sword with a bitter smile, Fan Xian whispered to his wife, "Do you see? Now it's the concubine's turn to reward you. Ning the Talented, this sword is for you. If anything goes wrong, you can use it to cut me down." Lin Wanner was bashful again. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, she could not take a bite out of this wretched Lang Jun. Since Imperial concubine Shu and Ning the Talented had sent gifts, the other concubines naturally sent gifts as well. It was just that the ones who were not well known sent gifts together. Only Imperial concubine Ning was a member of the Liu family, so she was particularly different. Furthermore, she had received the news last night that Lady Liu had finally been promoted. In her joy, she had acted ruthlessly. Just the gift list alone was 2 feet thick, and it shocked the officials in the council. After the concubines, it was the Empress gift. As the mother of the country, the Empress gift was not ordinary. It was a sparkling and translucent jade scepter. It was very precious and indescribable. Today, the officials had finally opened their eyes. Since the founding of the Kingdom of Qing, there had not been a child of an official whose marriage had alarmed so many nobles in the palace. Of course, the officials who knew Lin Wanner's true identity knew the inside story. Not only was Lin Wanner the illegitimate daughter of the eldest princess, but she had always been favored by the emperor and the empress dowager. Growing up in the palace, she had a special relationship with these nobles. Gradually, the tables in the courtyard quieted down. The officials of the 6 ministries finally understood what was going on. At this moment, their expressions became much more restrained and dignified. The way they looked at the bride became somewhat strange. Finally, the most important bombshell was dropped. The emperor's handwritten letter was carried into Fan Manor by the eunuchs like a treasure. A large number of people in the courtyard knelt down. By the decree of the heavens, The emperor has decreed that the marriage between Fan and Lin will be completed at an auspicious time. Write this as a blessing. Fan Jian and Fan Xian carefully took it and unfolded it for everyone to see. On the pure white paper, there were 4 large words, 100 years of bliss. It was a very simple meaning, but the emperor, who did not like to get involved in the family affairs of his officials, had written it himself. The hidden meaning was not simple. Everyone in the courtyard guessed that Fan Xian had married Lin Wanner. He was as lucky as picking up a big ingot. In a room deep in the palace, the emperor of the kingdom of Qing was smiling as he looked at a painting. The painting was of a yellow-robed woman. The emperor had married Wanner, whom he admired the most, to Fan Xian. He thought that the woman in the painting would also like this daughter-in-law. For Fan Lin's marriage to be so grand, everyone thought that it was because the emperor loved Wanner. Even the concubines in the palace did not think of anything else. But the emperor knew that he only wanted to make up for the regret of Fan Xian not being able to marry as a prince. The emperor looked at the woman in the painting, and a smile rose to the corners of his lips. You used to like this kind of excitement. I hope he likes it too. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.